Chapter 702. Mu Xingjie completed close cultivation. Indeed, the adult star beast was extremely terrifying. They could challenge the dragon clan and survive through engulfing the world and stars. They were unequaled and no one knew how such a giant monster grew up. The only thing known was that the star beast had once fought with a wind dragon and eventually killed the wind dragon. However, the star beast was also seriously injured. Even the true martial school, which was at its peak during that time, couldn't kill the star beast avatar, so all they did was just seal him. After a long period of erosion, the seal turned out to have holes and released a strand of star beast avatar's spirit. Imagine how terrifying was star beast avatar. Just a junior star beast avatar was as terrifying as the great sage Great Perfection. It was unfathomable how powerful a mature one would be. Their only flaw compared to the Dragon Clan was that they had too little clan members. Although the Dragon Clan also did not have many clan members, the appearance of the Star Beast could be counted in single digits. Although it was only a strand of spirit of Star Beast, Yi Shiwen knew that it was extremely terrifying. He only had a slight contemptuous smile after the roar. Even if his actual body was sealed, it was not something that Yi Shiwen could deal with either. Yi Shiwen would be pinched to death with just a finger if its actual body was let out. It was just a spirit anyway, so it was nothing even if the spirit was quelled. However, it would be most terrifying if even its actual body was affected. Fortunately, he felt that such a thing would never happen. Yi Shiwen was not angry at all when he faced the contempt of Star Beast. He just smiled and said, "Did you ever expect today to happen when you planned this trap on me? Even you yourself did not think that you would fall into such a situation." It was true that Yi Shiwen could not deal with the Star Beast and the seal now. Perhaps he might not even be able to cope with the adult Star Beast even if he was promoted to the Great Sage and even equipped with Star Beast Avatar. But what's the matter as he was still at a young age? He had not even passed 1/10 of his cultivation and there was still a lot of time. His lifespan would only get longer and longer even after he entered the Great Sage, and he had plenty of time to grow. He was not capable of dealing with Star Beast now. Then what about 1,000 years later? 2,000 years later? 5,000 years later? Sooner or later, he would kill this Star Beast one day. The spirit of that Star Beast was dumbfounded when he heard Yi Ziwen's words. It had never thought about this before. That's right, what about 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years later? Yi Ziwen's growth in these few decades was already so terrifying. How terrifying would it be after growing for thousands of years? No one knew. Even his lifespan would be more than millions of years after breaking through to be a transcendent realm master. How terrifying would it be? If it was an ordinary person, even if it was Huang Wuji or outstanding talents like Mu Xingjie, it would not take them seriously. Its actual body would have been annihilated a long time ago if such a person could deal with it, so it was not worried at all. However, Yi Shiwen was different. It witnessed almost the growth of Yi Shiwen through the Tianyuan mirror. It saw Yi Ziwen's various adventures and grew up at an unimaginable speed. More importantly, Yi Mo was by his side. He was someone who had once served Demon King. What even was the existence of the Demon King? Yi Shiwen might not know, but it as a strand of the Star Beast's spirit clearly understood what it meant. The Demon King was such a behemoth, who destroys the world as if he was just taking something from someone else's pocket. The master of the world, a powerful character in the world. Yi Mo had always mentioned this to Yi Shiwen that the future achievements of Yi Shiwen were unimaginable. Maybe Yi Shiwen would really reach a level that allowed him to kill its actual body one day. Thinking of this, it could not help but feel horrified. It deeply regretted in his heart. Why was it so obsessed to choose such a malefic comet? First, it might have escaped a long time ago if it chose a random person and made him its puppet. Needless to say, it had now become a prisoner of Yi Shiwen. It might lose his life at any time and become a stepping stone for Yi Shiwen. No, you can't do this. The spirit of the Star Beast shouted immediately in worry. Are you regretting it now? It's too late. Yi Shiwen gave a cold humph and said to Yi Mo, "Speed up the absorption. I am afraid that Mu Xingjie completion on close cultivation is approaching. The timing will not be too far off." We will be in big trouble if we can't finish absorption before Mu Xingjie breakthroughs in his cultivation. They now had to compete for time and grab every second and minute. They must be fast, and faster than Mu Xingjie. Yi Shiwen even thought about attacking Mu Xingjie off guard if he was faster than Mu Xingjie. Yi Shiwen sat up as he talked. He mobilized the elixir in Tianyuan mirror and it started to burn, all of which were absorbed by the Tianyuan mirror. At the same time, bloody rays blossomed from the Tianyuan mirror. The blood pool's law chain in the center of Tianyuan mirror also began to shake madly, extracting the strength of the Star Beast Avatar's spirit. The Star Beast Avatar's spirit screamed, roared, and scolded, but could not change the situation. Yi Shiwen had made up his mind to absorb the Star Beast's spirit fully as soon as possible. Countless elixir was burning, allowing the blood slave to increase the speed of absorbing the Star Beast Avatar spirit. It was a lot faster than just now. The body of the junior Star Beast Avatar lying next to it started to glow, as if it was really going to revive. It was shot down by a spear at its peak. It was not seriously injured physically, but its spirit was annihilated. The blood slave had now replaced his original spirit, but his body gradually glowed with a tendency of reprieving from death, as if it were possessed by a spirit. Everything in Tianyuan mirror was going on nervously but methodically. Time passed by day. In a blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. 3 months' time was just a snap for many warriors, but it felt as if days dragged past like years for those who were concerned about the grievance between Yi Shiwen and the law enforcement hall. Yi Shiwen disappeared after he said that he would go to the law enforcement hall to kill Mu Xingjie in person. He disappeared as if he never existed. Some said that he disappeared after entering the Tibetan Star Summit and never came out again. There was no news at all and no one knew whether he was in close cultivation or hiding. The law enforcement hall disciples did not have any practical action other than swearing. This surprised and disappointed many of the true martial school disciples who expected a fiery scene that would leave both sides shattered, as they did not see what they expected. In addition to the ranting of the law enforcement disciple from time to time, both sides unexpectedly did not make any excessive actions. Instead, the whole situation was strangely left quiet down. A shocking news spread through the entire true martial school just when many people were about to forget about this matter. Mu Xingjie appeared from his closed cultivation. The news immediately attracted the attention of countless people as soon as it appeared. It stirred up the entire true martial school. For a period of 3 months, both parties had no interaction, which many people did understand. In addition, the upcoming extreme invasion of the emergent school affected most of the experience. Therefore, the sudden news of Mu Xingjie leaving close cultivation attracted many people's attention when many people were about to forget about this matter. Mu Xingjie has finally left his close cultivation. This talented man who has stirred true martial school for countless years has finally left his close cultivation. Everyone knew that he would definitely be a great sage realm great perfection master once he completed the said close cultivation. Mu Xingjie leaving close cultivation was considered nothing and would not attract so much attention under normal circumstances. The actual reason that attracted countless attention was the so-called agreed battle between Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie. Yi Shiwen tore up his spirit avatar during the battle 3 months ago and both of them made it clear that they were going to kill each other. Although it was not an officially agreed battle, it was actually disguised into an actual agreed battle. Both of them were outstanding figures in school. They were both the top characters who kept promises, so no one doubted that they would not show up to the agreement. Although this agreement was somewhat different, both of them would obviously fulfill this agreement. Never mind Mu Xingjie, Yi Shiwen also did not make a move during these 3 months. Neither did he take a step out of the Tibetan Star Summit. Many people doubt whether he was in close cultivation to prepare some trump card to contend against Mu Xingjie. After all, everyone believed that it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to fight against Mu Xingjie of the Great Sage Realm Great Perfection Realm with his half-step Great Sage strength, unless he used some evil dishonest methods. However, Yi Shiwen would definitely do it since he had already said it. Therefore, countless people wondered whether he was preparing for some backup. However, the other main character, Mu Xingjie, had completed his close cultivation before anyone figured out what Yi Shiwen was planning. Everyone guessed what Mu Xingjie would do as he faced Yi Ziwen's previous provocation. Would he rush directly to the true martial school? Soon, everyone had the answer. The entire true martial school saw the law enforcement hall masters travel across the vast sky, leaped across more than half of the true martial school and headed towards Tibetan Star Summit. Everyone stared at the person in lead. It was no one else but Mu Xingjie. Mu Xingjie, who had just completed his close cultivation, was still unable to fully control the aura of his body. Even a slight leak of his aura could make others terrified. The warriors who walked past the Tian region felt like a falling ice cave that was unbelievably frightening. It is the Great Sage Realm Master, the Master of Great Sage Realm Great Perfection, the King of Great Sage. Yi Shiwen, come out. I'm here to collect your head. 1. A Chinese belief that a certain someone is the curse of a person as though he is the person's natural nemesis that will bring disasters to the person. Chapter 703. 2 Steps to Tumble Everyone's Confidence in Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, come out. I'll take your head. Mu Xingjie flew above the Tibetan Star Summit. His tone was plain, as if he was saying an insignificant thing. From his perspective, he didn't come to meet Yi Shiwen for a fight. Instead, he just came to take Yi Ziwen's head. Was it rampant? Nobody felt that way. It was just an expected matter, wasn't it? One is a great sage great perfection realm, and the other is a half-step great sage late. Isn't this an expected matter? Everyone thought so, but they didn't know why they were a little uneasy in their hearts. A figure flew up from the Tibetan Star Summit. It was none other than Bai Jiansong. Dressed in a white robe with a long sword behind him, his elegance remained as before. In the face of the dominant Mu Xingjie, Bai Jiansong did not seem weak. Although his strength was not as good as Mu Xingjie, it was just because his cultivation time was too short. Although he could not compare with the speed of Yi Ziwen's progress, he was not inferior to the speed of Huang Wuji and others in the past. Sooner or later, he would be able to be on par with Mu Xingjie, so he was not timid. Where is Yi Shiwen? Mu Xingjie glanced at Bai Jiansong and said lightly. He didn't take Bai Jiansong to heart. Although Bai Jiansong was also one of the aces among the newcomers, there was still a huge gap compared with him currently. Therefore, Bai Jiansong was not qualified to have a dialogue on an equal footing with him. I'm sorry, Brother Yi is still in close cultivation. I know your purpose of visiting, but please wait until he comes out first. Bai Jiansong said without being lowly or overbearing. Although he was still not qualified to talk to Mu Xingjie, he was also a great sage who had his own manner and dignity. Bai Jiansong also forced himself to fly up at this time. The reason was very simple. It was because Yi Shiwen had not come out of his close cultivation. Although Bai Jiansong didn't know what secret weapon Yi Shiwen had prepared to deal with Mu Xingjie, it was an indisputable fact that Yi Shiwen had not come out yet. Since he had not come out, it proved that his preparation was not completed yet. So Bai Jiansong had to come up to delay the time in order to buy more time for Yi Shiwen. This was what a brother should do. Mu Xingjie frowned and didn't speak. There were already a lot of law enforcement hall disciples clamoring behind him. Who knows if he hasn't come out of close cultivation or dare not come out. I think he is just scared and went into hiding. He dare not face Brother Mu. Yeah, I think he is simply scared. This is expected. Who is he? He is just a half-step great sage. He dared to challenge Brother Mu. He is probably hiding out of fear now. If he wants to do close cultivation for 100 years, should Brother Mu wait for him for 100 years? Isn't he arrogantly challenging Brother Mu previously? Why is he hiding now? Bai Jiansong had a headache. Sure enough, this kind of thing happened. Be reasonable? Would the law enforcement hall be reasonable? Because what they hold on to would be the law, and their words were the truth and standards. Mu Xingjie said with a sneer, step aside. He couldn't treat Bai Jiansong the way he treated Yi Shiwen. Everyone knew the enmity between Yi Shiwen and the law enforcement hall, but if Bai Jiansong was involved in this matter, it would be provoking the entire Tibetan Star Summit. Then the matter would not be just as simple as it was now. There were not many people in the Tibetan Star Summit, but they were all brutally powerful. This was similar to Yi Shiwen opposing the law enforcement hall repeatedly and killing many of law enforcement hall masters, but he was targeting those hardliners in law enforcement hall and he did not extend the scope to the entire law enforcement hall. Yi Shiwen was basically upholding the principle of killing whoever that was against him. This was also because Yi Shiwen had no choice because law enforcement hall was too huge. They were not entirely united internally. Some people were also dissatisfied with Mu Xingjie, but he was powerful now, so many conflicts did not erupt. But once Yi Shiwen began to target law enforcement hall as a whole, those law enforcement hall disciples who would not go beyond the call of duty originally would also begin to take full revenge on Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen couldn't really handle that collective strength. Both sides were carefully controlling the scope to be within personal enmity, which was the bottom line that the top management could tolerate. They absolutely would not allow such a conflict between the two forces. What was the Tibetan Star Summit? It was the top 10 legatee in the past. Currently, there was also a transcendent master presiding in it. In the foreseeable future, the transcendent master presiding was also indispensable. Furthermore, after completing Tibetan Star Sutra, they were also going to embark on the revival road and accept many disciples. Meanwhile, Law Enforcement Hall was not an unknown soldier as well. They controlled the true martial school laws and were influential. How could these two powerful forces be allowed to have a large-scale conflict that was difficult to control? In true martial school, there seemed to be no rules, but it actually had its own rules. Once these rules were violated, they would be punished harshly by the top management, and there was nothing to be discussed. Brother Yi is really in close cultivation now. Bai Jiansong had a determined expression and he didn't move away at all. Well, you all at Tibetan Star Summit had the same attitude. Huang Wuji Yi Shiwen, and you are like that. You actually dare to stop me. Mu Shengjie's eyes became ice cold. He was always full of pride and other people dared not disobey him. But in this Tibetan Star Summit, no one really took him seriously. What's the big deal with stopping you? Who do you think you are? Supreme School Master? A clear and slightly mocking voice sounded from the Tibetan Star Summit, and a green figure flew from underneath. It was none other than Yi Shiwen. You have a death wish. Mu Xingjie looked at Yi Shiwen with his eyes full of unfathomable expressions. This was considered the first time Mu Xingjie saw Yi Shiwen in person. This audacious brat. He killed my spirit avatar multiple times and became stronger bit by bit. Although it was only Mu Shengjie's spirit avatar at the time, not anyone could afford to simply mess with it. Yi Shiwen was brewing into a major trouble now, so Mu Xingjie was still somewhat interested in him. Death wish. Yi Shiwen raised a corner of his mouth and said, "How shameless. I have heard many people say this before, but unfortunately they are all dead. Are you the next default hall master of Law Enforcement Hall? I advise you all to change another person as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be too late. Arrogant. Crazy. Ignorant child. Don't overestimate your abilities." Immediately after Yi Shiwen spoke, it caused the furious roar of countless Law Enforcement Hall disciples instantly. Yi Ziwen's words were not clearly stated, but the meaning was obvious that Mu Xingjie would die in his hands. So if Law Enforcement Hall did not change another successor, they would be out of successor soon. Countless disciples yelled and cursed suddenly. Words like arrogant and crazy were shouted repeatedly. Mu Xingjie had a cold expression. Yi Shiwen was more arrogant than he thought. Mu Xingjie just said, "How are you qualified to fight me?" Mu Shengjie's gaze was scornful and his tone was disdainful. He had such qualifications because he was a great sage, great perfection, but Yi Shiwen was just a half-step great sage late warrior. The gap between the two parties was simply a world's difference that was just not the same. Do I need any qualification to kill you? Yi Shiwen sneered. There was a pin-drop silence. Everyone was stunned by Yi Ziwen's arrogance. Do I need any qualification to kill you? What Yi Shiwen said made countless people dumbfounded. Arrogance could no longer describe the current Yi Shiwen. He was just a half-step great sage, but he dared to say such a thing. He was really crazy. Even madness couldn't describe him. Okay, let's see if you have anything else to say when you are executed later. Mu Xingjie had no patience to continue talking with Yi Shiwen. Killing him directly was the simplest way. Mu Xingjie stepped out one step, which was just a steady step, but it was as if stepping on the people's heart. The heartbeat of the crowd took an abrupt pause for just a moment. Boom! Mu Xingjie took the second step, and it was earth-shattering. A terrifying aura burst out of him instantly, overpowering the sky. He was as powerful as deities. Countless nearby warriors retreated frantically and did not dare to go close. Tibetan star summits arrays seemed to feel a terrifying threat. The buried arrays were automatically revived to shield the entire Tibetan star summit, so as to prevent this terrifying strength from destroying everything. Everyone's facial expression changed drastically. This was the mighty strength of a great sage, great perfection realm. Great perfection implied that he had cultivated the most perfect state in great sage realm. Among the great sages, he was the emperor and the invincible master. When such a powerful master attacked with all his strength, that extent of power was really horrifying. So many great sages present changed their expression drastically during that one step. They surely couldn't do it to such an extent. For them, this was also a strength to look up to, especially by Jiansong on the side, whose face looked worried. They were all great sages, but the strength gap between them was a world's difference. Bai Jiansong was quite powerful, but he actually felt powerless when facing Mu Xingjie. Mu Xingjie was even more terrifying than the law enforcement hall's elders whom he dealt with previously. They were definitely not on the same level. This was the actual manner of a truly invincible great sage master. A worried feeling surged in Bai Jiansong's heart. Can Brother Yi handle such a powerful master? Bai Jiansong knew that Yi Shiwen always had some techniques that were unknown to others, and had his own miraculous encounter. He could avert dangers and create miracles every time. It was only a few decades, but he had advanced from the previous half-step legend all the way to half-step great sage. His strength was increasing rapidly that it was almost unheard of. Even the senior brother was not that outstanding in the past. That was why Bai Jiansong had confidence in Yi Shiwen. Maybe he could create miracles. But now that Bai Jiansong had really seen Mu Xingjie's competency, and he also hesitated. Could Yi Shiwen deal with such a terrifying Mu Xingjie? With just 2 steps, Mu Xingjie tumbled everyone's confidence in Yi Shiwen completely. This was the strength of Mu Xingjie, who had been dominating throughout true martial school for countless years. Chapter 704. The duel between 2 masters. This magnificent vigor was like that from a deity in ancient times. It suppressed the world and suffocated people. Everything that Yi Shiwen did before was rendered useless. Prior to this, Yi Ziwen's unexpected results had made many people have great confidence in him and believed that he could compete with Mu Xingjie. After all, he had done many things that ordinary people thought were impossible. So, although many people felt that Mu Xingjie could defeat Yi Shiwen one-sidedly, there were also many people who had confidence in Yi Shiwen and felt that Yi Shiwen should win. After all, he was no fool. If he did not have a certain amount of self-confidence, would he dare to challenge Mu Xingjie? Since he dared to challenge, then he must have confidence. So, it might be possible that Yi Shiwen would be able to overturn the battle. But now, in merely 2 steps, and everything seemed illusory. Those who were previously optimistic about Yi Shiwen were not optimistic about him now. It was not that they underestimated Yi Shiwen, but this Mu Xingjie was too horrifying and really formidable. Mu Xingjie was just like the gods, invincible and difficult to beat. If Yi Shiwen was given hundreds of years for his cultivation realm to catch up with Mu Xingjie, then people still think he still had a chance to fight with Mu Xingjie. After all, no one dared to deny his talents. In such a short period of time, he had cultivated to such an extent. His talents were strong enough to shock the ancient world. However, there was no such time now. He was not in his strongest state but was facing Mu Xingjie in Mu Xingjie's strongest state. That frightening godlike atmosphere made everyone lose confidence in Yi Shiwen. Mu Xingjie just stepped out and Yi Shiwen felt a horrifying pressure. When he came forward, the earth was eclipsed and overwhelmed. Yi Ziwen's expression changed immediately. He could feel that Mu Xingjie's great vigor had turned into an overpowering wind scraping on his face. If he did not have a strong body, the overpowering wind created by Mu Shengji's vigor would physically disintegrate him. It was as terrible as the fury of the gods. His thoughts were clear in his heart. Mu Shengjie was designated by the Law Enforcement Hall to be the next generation leader. So, his strength must be awesome. For many years, there were hardly any opponents in the same power realm. Only Huang Wuji could be considered an opponent. How could such a terrible supermaster who had crushed countless masters of the same power realm with his full strength not be terrifying? However, it was a hurdle that Yi Shiwen had to cross. Since enrolling in true martial school, the grievances between him and the Law Enforcement Hall never ended. He had been around for decades. This should be over by now. Next, he had to face the frenzied attacks of Emergent School. There would not be time to deal with the grievances with the Law Enforcement Hall. So, he had to race against the clock to be faster than Mu Shengjie. Who knows, at the end, he was still a step slower and he did not complete his close cultivation first. However, fortunately, he hurried out at the most critical time. After a full 3 months, Yi Shiwen finally urgently forced the Blood Slave to absorb the spirit at any cost. Finally, the Blood Slave managed to fully absorb the Star Beast spirit. Finally, he could fully control the Star Beast avatar and gain the ability to contend with Mu Shengjie. Now, his main body was still practicing in Tianyuan Mirror, trying to break through to become Great Sage, but now it was just a Blood Slave controlling the Star Beast avatar. However, it was time to end this. Yi Zaiwen's eyes were as brilliant as the stars. It seemed that the universe was in the midst of life and death. He made his move. Everyone thought he could not move in the presence of Mu Shengjie's terrible vigor. After all, Mu Shengjie was a master of the Great Sage Great Perfection realm. Even the ordinary Great Sage would be so intimidated and could not make a move. This was the pressure from the spirit. Unexpectedly, Yi Shiwen moved. He could actually move. Mu Shengjie was a little surprised, but then he became cold and ruthless. No matter whether Yi Shiwen could move, in his heart, it was impossible to change the outcome of this battle. Mu Shengjie accelerated his pace and moved in a mysterious manner. He rushed in front of Yi Shiwen and grabbed Yi Shiwen forcefully. Immediately, the endless void collapsed and everything else collapsed. He looked like an ancient deity and slapped coldly at Yi Shiwen. All your struggles are in vain. You are not even a great sage. How can you be my opponent? Mu Shengjie seemed to pronounce a summary statement, seeing that his slap would kill Yi Shiwen. As he spoke, Yi Shiwen made his move. This was a real move. The body that seemed to be shocked then now burst into a terrible vigor, which was equally powerful to Mu Shengjie's vigor. He was not backing down. His 5 fingers instantly squeezed into a fist, turned into a big star, and plunged down towards Mu Shengjie. Boom! The shocking vigors collided in the air. The chi between the two burst into unparalleled strength, shattering the space into powder. A large amount of chaos poured out, pulverizing many of the arrays in the true martial school. Both of them moved too fast in just a split second. This was an amazing match. When everyone was still distracted discussing what the two would do, they had already exchanged blows. Unlike what everyone thought, the situation was not that Yi Shiwen was busted up. On the contrary, in this round of confrontation, the two sides seemed to be equally matched. Neither side could overcome the other. The confrontation between both of them exploded into endless light, which blinded countless people instantly. The light was too dazzling. Many legends even bled in the eyes and could not watch it. This was only a prelude to the confrontation. Until the storm subsided, neither of them made a move again but just looked at each other quietly. Both of them were sizing up each other. Especially Mu Shengjie. If Yi Shiwen was able to break away from the control of his vigor earlier, he was already surprised. Now he was truly shocked. He really did not expect that Yi Shiwen would really contend with him and even put him in a disadvantage. Seeing the vigor just now, it had definitely reached the great perfection of the Great Sage realm. On his way, he had heard some disciples from the Law Enforcement Hall saying that Yi Shiwen was always vile. He might have a secret method to temporarily boost his strength to a certain level, and so Mu Shengjie should be careful. It was just that he did not bother about it. The strength of this secret method could not compare to people like him who were practicing the genuine way. What was more, there was no such secret method. He never knew that there was a secret method that could help people from half-step Great Sage Advance to the Great Sage Great Perfection realm. Now, it seemed that he was ignorant. He underestimated Yi Shiwen. The two were still assessing each other in vigilance, but the surroundings were already in chaos. How is this possible? The disciples of the law enforcement hall especially found the scene unimaginable. It was unbelievable that Yi Shiwen actually fought against Mu Xingjie equally matched without being at a disadvantage. Many people maliciously conjectured that the slap would cause Yi Shiwen to explode, but it never happened. It seemed rather impossible to happen at all. Does he really have any secret method that can boost his strength so much? This is too terrible. What secret method is this? It is really unheard of. Many people had determined that Yi Shiwen must have used a secret method of stimulating his strength. Otherwise, how could he contend with Mu Xingjie? However, because of this, many people were wondering what secret method Yi Shiwen used in order to achieve such a shocking effect. He was just using the secret method. When the time of the secret method is over, he will return back to his original form. Trash will forever remain as trash. That's exactly the case. For such a horrendous secret method, the aftermath must be terrifying. Although he had performed it well before and is talented, the aftermath of this secret method can completely cripple him. Even if he survives this battle, he will be crippled. Yeah. Just admit that you did it. Karma will definitely hunt you back. Many people nodded their heads, especially those in the law enforcement hall. Their emotions were more relaxed. It was shocking to see Yi Shiwen able to contend with Mu Xingjie even if it was only achieved with the help of the secret method. However, now that they think about it, Yi Shiwen might be reduced to a useless person by the aftermath of the secret method or die on the spot. This immediately made them happy. Yi Ziwen's growth rate was too fast to a shocking level. Mu Xingjie might not care. He had absolute confidence in his strength, but it did not mean that others also had such confidence. When compared to the growth rate of a monster like Yi Shiwen, they were far behind. If Yi Shiwen really grew into a character like Huang Wuji, then he would be a hidden calamity to the law enforcement hall which they had no solution for. Finally, they could witness his self-destruction. Even if he did not die, he would be reduced to a useless person which would make him less scary. Mu Xingjie was momentarily stunned and was surprised by Yi Shiwen. Then, in his eyes, endless hope surged forward, and he was a little excited. For him who was about to step into Great Sage Great Perfection, it was not so easy to find a qualified opponent. Now, he did not know what secret method Yi Shiwen used to break through to this level, but he was a worthy opponent. A figure as fast as lightning had already reached in front of Yi Shiwen yet again in just a split second. He punched again, flaunting the profoundness of martial art. It was nothing else but the Seven Cranes' divine hand. This was the first time his deity used the seven divine hands of crane control. There was a faint sound of cranes. The terrible coercion collapsed the sky and the earth in an instant. His palm was white like jade, charging towards Yi Shiwen. Chapter 705. Respective advantages. The vast sky broke open in an instant. The terrifying power could even shake the mountains. The legendary Almighty had great ability and was omnipotent, but Mu Sheng was like the ancient legendary Almighty deity at this moment. The endless qi on his body swept out like a wave and formed a small field that annihilated the entire sky. The omnipresent qi surged toward Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also moved by clenching his fingers into a fist, which instantly turned into a big star and forged ahead. Even his vigor did not give the slightest concession. His fist will actually contained an extremely sharp sword will. Seemingly omnipotent, it destroyed Mu Xingjie's Seven Cranes' divine hand. There was a mighty power and omnipotent sharpness that could destroy everything when the sword light and fist will were combined together. Whoosh! The sword will and fist will instantly pierced and eradicated the Seven Cranes' divine hand and traveled all the way to Mu Xingjie's face with terrifying might. Poof! Mu Xingjie retreated madly by tens of miles in a row, only to avoid this blow. It was too scary. Mu Shengji's entire palm was almost chopped off by him and blood splattered like a pillar. This time, the confrontation ended with Yi Shiwen prevailing. Not to mention the countless people around who were shocked. Even Mu Shengjie looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. How was it possible for him to be at a disadvantage during this fight? His 7 cranes divine hand got defeated by Yi Shiwen in a crazy way. His entire palm would be rawly chopped off if he did not retreat just in time. This sword will was too powerful. He never knew that the sword will could be so powerful that it even posed a huge threat to him. His flesh was precious as jade and was difficult to touch. The flesh that was tempered by the 7 cranes divine hand was very strong. He was not even afraid of those special bloodlines. He had once ripped off a few fierce deity true bodies who tried to go against him on the spot. They absolutely could not compete with him. He had always been very confident in his flesh as he had never met a true opponent who could contend with him, but he never expected to be defeated by Yi Shiwen. What did this mean? It meant that Yi Ziwen's flesh was even more terrifying than his. It's impossible. Mu Shengjie knew that Yi Shiwen practiced a martial technique called tyrant body scripture, but he was confident that even a tyrant body trained through tyrant body scripture was impossible to be so much stronger than him. Mu Shengjie was defeated immediately during the fight just now. How could Yi Shiwen have such terrifying flesh? His 7 cranes divine hand was either a mysterious inheritance or ancient almighty that was extremely powerful. Although it looked like a name of a specific style, it was actually a complete set of martial techniques, including internal power, style, body motion, etc. He could rush all the way through the true martial school solely relying on this martial art. Everyone of the same generation except for Huang Wuji, who had more mysterious encounters than him, were completely suppressed by him. It also contained a form of technique that makes his body extremely strong. He could even challenge higher levels solely based on his physical body. Although it was not as exaggerated as Yi Shiwen, it is already very outstanding. However, he ended disastrously in Yi Ziwen's hands instantly. However, he did not know that although Yi Ziwen's flesh was extremely tyrannical, it was not the tyrant body that everyone imagined. It was actually a physique that was a lot stronger. It was the flesh of the Star Beast avatar, which was a terrifying monster that treated the world and stars as food and absorbed the power of countless stars. His physical body was unimaginably tyrannic. Even Yi Shiwen didn't know whether his flesh that was trained through the tyrant body could compete with Star Beast avatar when his realm reached the great sage great perfection. At least it was impossible for now. Mu Shengjie was abnormally depressed, but Yi Shiwen felt extremely pleasurable because he always had to compete with masters who were far stronger than him for such a long time. His realm was far behind and was often suppressed by their realms and skill. The only thing he could counter and make him fight surpass realms was nothing else but a tyrannical flesh. However, it was different now. Based on the flesh, Star Beast Avatar's flesh was more tyrannical than Mu Shengjie. Based on realms, he was definitely not worse than Mu Shengjie. Based on skills, it had been a long time since he had such a hearty battle with someone who had the same realm and level. Therefore, he even had an expression of excitement on his face. Without any hesitation, he flew up again and suppressed directly towards Mu Shengjie with his tyrannical flesh. Mu Shengjie sneered. His hand injury was almost healed in just a short period of time. It was obvious that his secret healing method was not simple. He was not afraid even when Yi Shiwen crushed directly towards him. Who is he? He was Mu Shengjie, who had been in the true martial school for countless years. Although Yi Ziwen's combat power was far beyond his expectations, how could he possibly be timid at such times? He activated his 7 cranes divine hand once again. This lost technique was absolutely powerful. He used to rely on this lost technique and defeated numerous opponents. Although he suffered a loss just now, it was not because his lost technique did not work. His flesh was just inferior to Yi Shiwen. A huge crane shadow appeared behind him. The sound of screaming that almost penetrated the universe burst into an unimaginable light and slammed directly towards Yi Shiwen. Boom! The fight between the two parties was like a battle with neither prepared to give an inch. The lost technique of both of them was as if making the universe lose its light. The chi headed towards each other crazily and madly suppressed the other. This was a difficult battle for Mu Xingjie. He finally realized that the Yi Shiwen in front of him was not simple at all. It was absolutely nothing like what he expected. Having a battle with him was as if fighting Huang Wuji. It was difficult, a very tough opponent. He even had to wrap most of the chi into his hands to avoid getting injured by Yi Ziwen's hits. Yi Ziwen's method was too brutal. There were no fancy methods used, he just fought. Obviously, Yi Shiwen knew what his advantage was. It was his tyrannical flesh, so he exhibited his physical strength fully. Mu Xingjie dared not to have a direct confrontation with Yi Shiwen on this aspect. In fact, Mu Xingjie did not know that Yi Shiwen was in a state battling opponents surpassing his power realm all year round. The only thing he could rely on was his tyrannical flesh. In the matter of using his own flesh to exert the most power was, not to mention Mu Xingjie, Yi Shiwen dared to say that no one in the entire true martial school was as experienced as him. Although his realm and skill increased at once, these two, especially the realm, were in fact his main weaknesses. Although he was not inferior to Mu Shengji's realm, all of Mu Shengji's realms were achieved step by step. He had a very solid foundation and lots of insights from every realm. However, Yi Ziwen's actual person now was nothing more than a half-step great sage. He looked more like Parvenu now. Although his realm was made up immediately with the memory of the adult Star Beast avatar spirit, it was definitely not as good as Mu Shengji's achievement by walking up step by step like this. In addition, many of the realm perceptions in the memory of the adult Star Beast avatar spirit was more relevant with the Star Beast. Even the fighting style was for Star Beast. However, Yi Shiwen could not reveal the true body of the Star Beast now. He could only fight in human form, which was a lot weaker in terms of realms. Although in general, he was still on the same level as Mu Xingjie and there was no appearance of situations like the past when he was inferior. Therefore, the only thing that Yi Shiwen could rely on to defeat Mu Xingjie in the end was his tyrannical flesh. He could only defeat Mu Xingjie by maximizing the power of the flesh. Although Yi Ziwen's tactics looked a little rough and a little messy, in fact, this was exactly the exhibition of the strength of the flesh at its most extreme level. On the other side, Mu Xingjie was also a battle-hardened and experienced person. After he realized that his flesh was not as good as Yi Shiwen, he immediately understood that he had to use his absolute advantages in the realm and skill to suppress Yi Shiwen. Therefore, they were equally matched during the short fight. Both parties were adjusting their perception of each other throughout the fight. Boom! The both of them firmly crashed into each other and a terrible power suddenly swept out an endless storm, rippling out circle by circle like a wave. All the space that it went through was crazily twisted and broken down, crumbled into powder. The two of them had done their best and no one dared to play it easy because they knew that they both had a tyrannical opponent. A huge power spread through each of their arms to their bodies. That terrible power could even blow up the mountains in an instant. If it wasn't that both of their physical bodies were indeed strong enough, they would have already disintegrated into blood mist by now. Their bodies were like two powerful battle gods. They firmly collided against each other in the air, as none of them would take a slight less step back for a moment. In the face of strong vigor, they launched their new attack. Yi Ziwen's left hand turned into a martial sword and a ray of terrifying sword light shot straight towards the sky. With his hand as a sword, he immediately chopped down towards Mu Xingjie with lightning speed. It was extremely fast, as if it was really lightning. On the other side, Mu Xingjie also moved. He was not slower than Yi Shiwen. Two steels appeared in his hand and fell down from the air towards Yi Shiwen. It was the beast control steel. Yi Shiwen had seen it before, but he only saw half of it. It was still an incomplete Great Holy Tool when he first saw it, but had now become a complete and powerful Great Holy Tool that was enough to show disdain to all the other Great Holy Tools. Boom! A new round of battle between the two parties suddenly crashed into each other again. The shocking wave burst into a dazzling light and a small mushroom cloud rose slowly. Their attacks unexpectedly destroyed the atom and shattered the vacuum. Both of their attacks were destructive and could destroy everything. However, they were an equal match in this confrontation. Chapter 706. Time to stop this. Countless people took a deep breath as they watched the mad battle between both of them. The battle between the two parties had surpassed everyone's imaginations. Before this battle, no one expected that Yi Shiwen did not only contend with Mu Xingjie, but was also not at a disadvantage. In addition, he did not look exhausted at all. It was nothing like everyone's initial thought about the secret technique, because there would always be some sort of surprising anomalies when a secret technique was exhibited, such as blood light bursting into the sky. The more powerful the secret technique was, the more terrifying the anomalies would be. However, Yi Ziwen's de-emphasized expressions seemed absolutely nothing like exhibiting some shocking secret technique. Both of them were like the unrivaled demon gods as they brought out a vast aura every time they made a move. Both of them consciously controlled themselves and did not continue the fight here because this was a battle between their supreme martial arts. Although there were arrays as protection, the battle between the two of them was too horrifying. It would not be worth it as they would possibly waste numerous arrays and countless wealth. Both of them were lightning fast and they constantly collided into each other like two big stars in the sky. They broke through the clouds and fought all the way to the universe. The most terrifying thing was that both sides started to develop anger as they fought more and more frequently. It was no longer possible for them to stop or give concession because both parties knew that they were both masters at this level. One would most probably face his opponent's thunderous blow once they gave a slight concession. Therefore, the both of them were not as temperate as they were compared to the beginning, and every single attack spilled blood. The audience saw blood splattering out from time to time, but they had no idea whose blood it was because everyone was not able to watch the battle clearly anymore. Everyone felt that this battle's miserable condition was extremely shocking. It even shocked countless masters. Many martial warriors who watched this battle with their spiritual senses had chills all over their back and entire body. This was the terrifying might of the Great Sage Great Perfection realm. They would probably be struck to death in an instant without even being able to endure a punch if they were in this battle. They all felt the gap between themselves and these two people. Some masters of the Great Sage Great Perfection realm who were present were terrified because they realized the huge gap between themselves and these two people. They were also in the Great Sage Great Perfection realm like the duo, but it seemed as if they were not in the same realm. Who else in this realm could fight them? Perhaps Huang Wuji was a worthy opponent, but there were not many at all. These two were already standing at the peak of Great Sage. If everyone was still somewhat used to Mu Xingjie being acting this way, then countless people were in disbelief after knowing that Yi Shiwen also had such a terrifying combat power. Especially those martial warriors who clamored to kill Yi Shiwen suddenly felt that their blood ran cold. They even clamored to eliminate Yi Shiwen previously, but he was such a horrifying character who contended with the god in their hearts and did not fall into a disadvantage. This situation was just like Huang Wuji in the past. How would they dare to clamor in front of Huang Wuji? Perhaps someone might have done it before, but those people had either disappeared or were pinched to death by Huang Wuji. They did not want to repeat the mistakes of those people. Although Yi Shiwen obviously used some secret method, he was definitely not someone for them to provoke. In the short period of time while everyone was still amazed and stunned, both parties had fought with thousands of moves in the starry sky. Every single collision was like an unrivaled thunder which the impact turned the meteorite into a fine powder in a split second. Mu Xingjie yelled, even his clothes were a little ragged and was no longer at ease as before. Over the years, none of the battles among his generation, except for the battle with Huang Wuji, could put him in such a difficult situation. They were like destined rivals, who started a feud a long time ago and often had battles against each other. However, it was simply just Huang Wuji. Mu Xingjie had defeated the rest of his peers and they were all losers to him, but he never expected to be suppressed by a junior. For him, it was extraordinary shame and humiliation. Yi Ziwen's situation was not any better than his. Yi Shiwen had wounds almost everywhere on his body. The Star Beast Avatar's flesh was extremely tyrannical, ordinary attacks won't even be able to break it, but Mu Xingjie's attack was not just any ordinary attack. His serious wounds were so deep that even his bones were visible. The exposure of the white bones were seen in more than one area. It was extremely creepy. His Phoenix regeneration technique could not even heal the wounds completely, or his recovery speed simply couldn't keep up with the speed of his injury. The intensity and madness of the fight between both of them could be easily imagined. However, Yi Shiwen was more calm compared to Mu Shengji's extreme anger. The fact that he could sustain a fight with Mu Shengjie for such a long period of time was already very impactful to him. It was already very beneficial and inspiring for Yi Shiwen to even watch battles between masters of this level in person. Most importantly, he was currently involved in it personally even though he couldn't fully adapt to the battles of this level in the beginning. Although he also had experience fighting with Star Beast Avatar before, his opponents were not strong enough at that time. Basically, none of them was as terrifying as Mu Shengjie. This enlarged his inadaptability to a maximum degree and became his flaw. However, this flaw became smaller as the battle continued. The feeling of discomfort gradually disappeared, which meant he had used this battle to break the gap between him and Star Beast Avatar. It disappeared little by little as he fought more and more smoothly. Mu Shengjie also noticed the change and seized the opportunity to target his weakness immediately. However, Yi Shiwen improved rapidly and soon his weakness was smoothed out. Mu Shengjie didn't care too much and simply thought that Yi Shiwen was just using some secret technique, which made it difficult for Yi Shiwen to adapt to the current power. Word control steel. Smash down, roared Mu Shengjie. It was an extreme humiliation to Mu Shengjie for being tied in the fight with Yi Shiwen. He must eliminate Yi Shiwen and he must kill Yi Shiwen as soon as possible. The entire battlefield suddenly changed color and the endless spiritual energy was absorbed by the word control steel. The entire field was trembling, as if it was shivering in fear under his word control steel and would be suppressed by him. It could be seen how terrifying Mu Shengjie was. Although he had just broken through to the Great Sage Great Perfection, ordinary ones of the Great Sage Great Perfection was definitely not his opponent if he treated the fight seriously. Only a freak like Yi Shiwen, who relied on his tyrannical flesh, could contend with him. Otherwise, Yi Ziwine would be easily torn apart on the spot. Boom! The overflowing force in the air swept down. The essence of the word control steel was the word control, which could turn the steel into martial instruments. Even the sky collapsed immediately. Yi Shiwen made a long shout. He knew that he must not let Mu Shengji's vigor build up at the most critical time. Although Yi Shiwen did not have the upper hand at the beginning, he still successfully suppressed Mu Shengji's vigor. On the contrary, Yi Ziwen's vigor increased little by little, which made him stronger and smoother as he fought. Mu Shengjie wanted to reverse and untangle the unfavorable situation now. How could Yi Shiwen allow it to happen? These two are indeed unrivaled. Who else can be their opponent, unless the Transcendent Realm Master makes a move? The people who were watching at this scene murmured in disbelief. Yi Shiwen is very strong. Even Mu Shengjie, such a terrifying and strong person who could easily defeat someone with just a glance, couldn't win him. Yi Shiwen has already proved his strength. Many people only saw that they fought really closely at first and did not feel anything wrong, but some people with good sight immediately knew what Mu Shengjie was going to do. He was going to regain his own vigor. What actually was vigor? It was feeling in power. Yi Shiwen instantly defeated Mu Shengji's initial disdainful vigor and now Mu Shengjie wanted to find it back. The most critical point now was whether Yi Shiwen could beat his vigor down again. If Yi Shiwen failed to do so, and allowed Mu Shengjie to fight smoother and smoother, then the entire outcome would be fixed. Yi Shiwen knew, and because of knowing it, he did not dare to lower his guard. The Tianyuan mirror in Yi Ziwen's body also burst into a bloody light. The bloody power flowed along Yi Ziwen's body and directly blasted upwards. It turned into a big star and forged ahead fiercely without being any weaker. Yi Shiwen even mobilized the power of Tianyuan mirror in his body to conduct this hit. Yi Shiwen would rarely use the Tianyuan mirror's energy because he wanted to suppress the dragon vein. He would usually choose to defend firmly, but he couldn't afford to be hesitant now. He must prevent Mu Shengjie from building up his vigor. The meteorite exploded around the two of them one after another. Their relentless power collided in the air and swept out everything. It shattered the vacuum and burst into unimaginable power. Their strength was difficult to predict, and it exceeded everyone's imagination. At this time, perhaps only the transcendent realm masters would be able to see through the strength of these two at a glance. Mu Xingjie was indeed a battle-hardened man. Another beast word steel was smashed downward without any hesitation after he saw that the word control steel was blocked by Yi Shiwen. In Mu Shengjie's hands, these two steels were definitely not any weaker than the strength of the great holy tool. Yi Zaiwen's fists were almost smashed into pieces and his body was rumbling after the repeated crashes. Yi Shiwen did not hesitate as he faced the besiege of the beast word steel. He immediately unfolded all kinds of anomalies behind him and various types of martial arts burst out in an instant. It suddenly formed various anomalies behind him and forged forward. Boom! They immediately bounced away from each other. Mu Xingjie stepped back a few steps, but his face had hints of smiling expression while Yi Shiwen was in quite a difficult situation. Obviously, Yi Shiwen had suffered a loss in the battle. Haha, it's time to end this. Mu Shengjie's face was not just cold and ruthless. For the first time, he had a delighted expression. Chapter 707. To take advantage of your illness to kill delighted. This was the only moment when he really felt delighted. He was badly sullen previously. Although he did not seem to be at a disadvantage in the situation, not being able to win one-sidedly was no different from being at a disadvantage to him. Yi Shiwen, even if you have some sort of great secret techniques, so what? It is all fabricated in the face of absolute strength. You are definitely not my opponent. Mu Xingjie said coldly as if he was strengthening his confidence. Die! Mu Xingjie shouted loudly and two beast control steel were immediately smashed downward. He had already thought of a way. Since his flesh was not Yi Zaiwen's opponent, he could crush him directly with martial instruments. He believed that Yi Shiwen definitely could not compete with his beast control steel. I'll definitely have your head this time. Mu Xingjie rushed straight to Yi Zaiwen's face. The beast control steels were smashed downward, followed by revealing a terrifying wave and scattered in circles. Boom! 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 Yi Shiwen was pushed backwards continuously and seemed to be in a difficult situation. He heard the voice of law enforcement hall disciples through his ears. They did not dare to make a sound when they saw that Yi Shiwen was not at a disadvantage at all. However, they couldn't help and immediately roared madly after they saw Yi Shiwen being at a disadvantage and was in such a difficult situation. The two of them were basically almost on par. Yi Zaiwen's flesh was the only element that was stronger than Mu Xingjie, but Yi Zaiwen's flesh wasn't able to exhibit his advantage when Mu Xingjie kept on crushing him with his martial instruments. Therefore, he immediately fell into a disadvantage. Yi Shiwen, you can't continue like this. It would be endless if you go on like this. Yi Amo reminded him aloud. Although Yi Shiwen would not be defeated, he would not be able to defeat Mu Xingjie too. It seemed to be an endless battle if they continued to fight. Perhaps they would fight for a long period of time until the chi of both sides finally ran out for the battle to end. However, it would take forever to use up all their chi with the strength of these two people. Let's get it done quickly. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly, Yi Amo, draw out the dragon vein's power and give it to me. Yi Zaiwen's voice shocked the entire field and many meteorites around him exploded into powder. The unending stream of power in his body started to condense. It was the dragon vein's power. The dragon vein's power was mobilized in the Tianyuan mirror. The spiritual energy drawn from the dragon vein was infused into Yi Zaiwen's body at once. This was a lot more pure than the ordinary spiritual energy. This energy did not have any impurities because it was directly extracted from the dragon vein. There were many spiritual veins found in the whole world, which were all second-class energy derived from the dragon veins. Those were definitely incomparable to the direct dragon veins. Although this dragon vein was not extremely huge, a lot of it was still consumed throughout the countless years. However, it was still essentially stronger than the spiritual vein. The spiritual energy was currently drawn to Yi Zaiwen's body. Yi Zaiwen's body suddenly burst out energy waves that were more tyrannical and terrifying than before. The waves almost faintly touched the scope of the transcendent realm. The entire dome trembled and the ominous power was unrivaled. This was because more than half of the Tianyuan mirror's power was originally used to suppress the dragon vein. However, all the power of Tianyuan mirror was utilized on this dragon vein when Yi Shiwen wanted to extract that dragon vein. It was needed to suppress the backlash of the dragon vein while drawing out its power. The big sects would originally bury the dragon veins underground and have countless arrays to suppress and extract the dragon vein's spiritual energy. It would then evolve into a series of spiritual veins to suppress the energy. However, Yi Shiwen had to spare no effort as he wanted to use the Tianyuan mirror to complete the suppressing process. However, this was already enough. Although they lacked the additional power of the Tianyuan mirror, Yi Shiwen had gained additional power of the dragon vein's spiritual energy. Yi Shiwen only felt that the power in his entire body was boiling. He suddenly kicked with his feet, ripped the vast sky, and rushed directly towards Mu Xingjie. Mu Xingjie didn't know what happened to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, who was in a bad situation after his attack, was currently taking the initiative to attack him. Shatter it all! Yi Shiwen screamed as he clenched his finger in a fist and turned into a big star. It smashed directly onto Mu Xingjie in an instant. Mu Xingjie immediately felt an unrivaled force land onto his body. It destroyed all of his defenses in an instant. Yi Zaiwen's accelerated speed made it too late for Mu Xingjie to throw out his beast control steel. Bang! Mu Xingjie was directly blasted out. He suddenly spurted out a mouthful of blood and nearly had internal injuries due to the explosion. Brother Mu got injured? Numerous people stared at this scene. Mu Xingjie indeed got punched by Yi Shiwen. Wasn't he still in the upper hand just now? How did he get blasted out so suddenly? What means did Yi Shiwen even use? However, they were not too confused this time because they had felt and saw that Yi Zaiwen's strength improved greatly. Mu Xingjie's eyes were filled with indefinite bewilderment. He didn't know how Yi Shiwen suddenly burst out such a powerful force. Yi Shiwen now seemed like he used some secret technique compared to just now. The powerful anomalies couldn't be hidden. However, Yi Shiwen didn't give him much time to think and he rushed over again. His speed was so fast that he had once again returned in front of Mu Xingjie in the blink of an eye. At this time, Yi Zaiwen's body was covered with golden divinity as if he was a golden god. He bursted out at once. The golden fist moved and punched downward suddenly. Boom! The entire vault was instantly penetrated by Yi Zaiwen's golden fist. During that imminent peril, Mu Xingjie spread out a pair of wings behind him and avoided Yi Zaiwen's attack by a few millimeters. Just when he breathed a sigh of relief, he suddenly saw Yi Shiwen rush directly towards him after a flash of gold sparkles. The pair of golden wings behind him burst into a thunderous sound. Yi Shiwen chased directly towards him without any interval and did not give him any chance to breathe. He never thought that something like this would happen one day, which he was forced to retreat with all his strength. Without him knowing, his surroundings were already filled with storm power. The lightning dragons appeared in the sea of lightning and it was extremely horrifying. These lightning were like ropes that locked him up and made it inconvenient for him to move as before. It was impossible to achieve his original speed even if he sacrificed the pair of wings behind him. Boom! The strong airflow around Mu Xingjie suddenly swept out and the lightning around him vibrated. He was about to escape, but Yi Shiwen took advantage of the milliseconds' time and rushed over again. Another big golden fist swooped down. Bang! Mu Xingjie stumbled as he got hit by the golden fist. He almost fell directly into the lightning sea, but his condition was not any better with this being said. He was dismal with blood splattered all over and bone fragments fluttering around. Yi Zaiwen's attacks gave no concession at all. It was impossible for him to give concessions at this time. Mu Xingjie would definitely give no concession too if Mu Xingjie was in his position. The two sides only had to fight to death. Yi Shiwen made a decisive shot and did not give Mu Xingjie any chance to counterattack. It was an unrivaled attack as soon as he made a move because he wanted Mu Xingjie dead. Boom! 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 Sounds of loud crashes were heard, but it wasn't Mu Xingjie who continuously suppressed Yi Shiwen this time. In fact, Yi Shiwen kept on bombarding Mu Xingjie. Crack! The crisp sound of a bone fracture echoed the scene. Mu Xingjie's chest was completely smashed by Yi Shiwen and countless bones were broken. He flew out directly like a broken kite and stopped only after smashing countless meteorites. Mu Xingjie shouted for a long time and stared at Yi Shiwen with great hatred. It was the first time he got beaten up so miserably. Even during the battle with Huang Wuji, they mostly ended with a tie. He had never been in such a miserable situation. This was a total shame for him. Yi Shiwen, you have provoked me thoroughly. I will definitely kill you, said Mu Xingjie fiercely. A force in his body began to surge out. It was the secret technique he prepared to enhance his strength and determine the winner immediately with Yi Shiwen. He already felt that the battle can't go on like this. He did not know how long Yi Ziwen's secret technique could last, but he definitely couldn't wait for the day when Yi Ziwen's secret technique ended because he would be killed by Yi Shiwen way before that. His secret technique was originally practiced to fight Huang Wuji specifically, which would increase his power to a terrifying level in a short period of time. However, he did not expect that he would use it even before the battle with Huang Wuji. Furthermore, he had to use it on Yi Shiwen, a powerless tiny character who he had never paid attention to. Till this point of time, he had to admit that Yi Shiwen, this powerless character, had truly given him a huge shock. Yi Shiwen was also a huge threat to him and was an evenly matched opponent. A terrifying aura was going to pervade through him. He was like an awakened demon god that was impassioned all of a sudden. He wanted to rise up to conquer the realm and tear up the era and prologue of the demon god. However, Yi Shiwen didn't give him the opportunity and immediately condensed into a rippling mountain seal in the air. It turned into a huge mountain range and fell directly onto Mu Xingjie. Mu Xingjie's vigor that he just built up was interrupted instantly and he was smashed in an instant. His flesh was smashed open instantly and fragments of his bone flew out. Mu Xingjie's eyes found it hard to believe. How did this happen? His secret technique was interrupted even before he started to brew it. Yi Shiwen stared at Mu Xingjie coldly. How could he not understand the principle of taking advantage of your illness to kill you? Chapter 708. The end of a legend. Mu Xingjie's aura was terrifying just now. It was simply extremely terrifying. One could imagine how horrifying was the secret technique which he prepared a moment ago. After all, it was a secret technique Mu Xingjie used as a trump card. If Mu Xingjie really released it, Yi Shiwen might not be able to deal with it currently. Hence, how could he let Mu Xingjie release the secret technique successfully? Everyone was almost dumbfounded, staring dazedly at the scene in front of them. This actually happened. This is no ordinary man at all. This is Mu Xingjie, the next hall master of the Great Law Enforcement Hall. He is Mu Xingjie in the Great Sage Great Perfection realm. How could he be bombarded constantly like a dead dog by someone else? His body is constantly blasted away. Is this the end of the world? Otherwise, how could they witness such an impossible thing? I know that you will have a way, junior brother, Bai Jiansong said with a hearty laugh. He finally felt relieved now. Originally, he kept worrying about how Yi Shiwen could fight against Mu Xingjie. Even the senior brother had to go all out to fight against this terrifying character, Mu Xingjie, without daring to take him lightly. No matter how talented and genius Yi Shiwen was, the most important thing was that his age was too young and his cultivation time was too short. His cultivation time was not at the same level as Mu Xingjie at all. But after seeing how Mu Xingjie was miserably beaten up by Yi Shiwen now, Bai Jiansong finally believed what Yi Shiwen said before. He would not fight a battle if he was not confident in winning, and he would not do things that he was unsure of. However, even if Bai Jiansong had high confidence in Yi Shiwen previously, he would never dare to expect to witness this scene. The best ending he could think of previously was that Yi Shiwen could contend with Mu Xingjie without being killed by Mu Xingjie. Then, Yi Shiwen could hang on until Huang Wuji and Tibetan Star Sun were back. Now it simply seemed unnecessary. Yi Shiwen could settle Mu Xingjie by himself. If Bai Jiansong was not acquainted with Yi Shiwen and knew that he was still at half-step Great Sage 3 months ago, he would probably think that Yi Shiwen already had such strength initially, instead of using secret techniques. Because it did not seem like any secret technique was used, it was more like summoning Yi Ziwen's own strength. However, Bai Jiansong had no idea that Yi Shiwen really did not use any secret technique and just summoned the Star Beast avatar. Otherwise, he would never be Mu Shengji's opponent. Yi Ziwen's expression was cold while looking at Mu Shengjie. He wanted to take advantage to kill Mu Shengjie while Mu Shengjie was weak. He never thought of letting Mu Shengjie go, so he raised his golden fist and slammed downward again. Bang! Mu Shengjie was blasted out by Yi Shiwen again, and his mouth was bleeding profusely. There was no complete piece of flesh on his body, and a bunch of bones could be seen almost everywhere. This meant that Mu Shengjie's body was very sturdy, even sturdier than fierce deity True Body. If it was an average person, Yi Shiwen had already smashed him directly into a meat patty. Yi Shiwen, do you dare to fight with me fairly without using the secret technique? Roared Mu Shengjie. The secret technique that Mu Shengjie mentioned was not Yi Ziwen's sudden rise from half-step Great Sage to Great Sage Great Perfection realm. He was referring to Yi Ziwen's soaring combat power after that. Perhaps Mu Shengjie didn't even notice that he had a trace of timidness. In other words, he was attacked by Yi Shiwen to the point of being frightened. This was never the case previously. He dared to attack the opponent in the past even if he was against a person of a higher realm than him. He had never been timid. Even if Huang Wuji stepped into the Great Sage Great Perfection realm ahead of him, he had never been timid. But he was indeed timid now, and he didn't even realize it at all. He already felt that he couldn't beat Yi Shiwen who used the secret technique, so he requested for a fair fight. Mu Shengjie never thought that he would utter the so-called fairness at this time, which he didn't even care about in his heart initially. Mu Shengjie had a disdainful mentality towards the so-called fairness request originally. What is fairness? Only weak people will ask for fairness. The strong are living in an unfair world where different levels of strong men rule over different levels of matter. Mu Shengjie actually asked for fairness now because in the mentality of his heart, he actually became a weak man who was eager for a fair fight. He had strong confidence in himself that he would not be afraid of Yi Shiwen at all if it was a fair fight. In fact, Yi Shiwen would not be his opponent and would be killed by him. Just like previously, Yi Shiwen was beaten up terribly by him. You want fairness? As a Great Sage Great Perfection realm, you came to kill me, a half-step Great Sage. Do you think this is fair? Yi Shiwen smiled disdainfully and just dismissed the so-called fairness. When Mu Shengjie was an honored Great Sage Great Perfection and came to the Tibetan Star Summit to kill Yi Shiwen in person previously, did Mu Shengjie ever consider giving him time and wait for him to advance to have a fair fight? Mu Shengjie didn't even think about fairness previously. When he fell into a disadvantageous position, he wanted to be fair. How absurd was it? But it was exactly because of this, Yi Shiwen saw Mu Shengjie's lack of confidence clearly. Mu Shengjie was not confident to defeat Yi Shiwen who seemed to be using some secret technique. Yi Shiwen occupied the absolute upper hand and was dominating everywhere in the universe. Although his current body was not a tyrant body, the tyranny aura developed through his long-term cultivation of tyrant body scripture was released unconsciously. Yi Shiwen deliberately concealed his aura with aura convergence martial art usually, so it was not obvious. But now he didn't conceal deliberately, so all aura burst out at once. Yi Shiwen was just like an overlord who came from ancient times and looked at Mu Shengjie coldly. Mu Shengjie's eyes were crimson, and was almost choked by Yi Ziwen's words. Yeah, I never thought of the so-called fairness just now, and never thought that killing Yi Shiwen as a Great Sage Great Perfection realm is very unfair. Roar! Mu Shengjie screamed long and loud. His Buddha strength exploded and rushed out towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's icy voice sounded in his ear. It's over. Your legend is over. A huge stamp slammed down from the universe, just like a huge mountain crashing directly. Boom! It was the crush of absolute power. The powerful force directly blasted all the defenses on Mu Shengjie's body without any fancy tricks. The force smashed him straight onto a meteorite, shattering the meteorite directly. Blood gushed out profusely from his mouth, and his body was about to break apart completely. Yi Ziwen's power was too great. If it wasn't for Mu Shengji's sturdy body, he would already be dead by this time. What a terrifying combat power this is. Everyone was dumbfounded. How could this happen? How could this happen? Yi Ziwen's strong performance simply overturned the world views in their hearts. That is actually Mu Shengjie. Prior to this, even the people who were most optimistic about Yi Shiwen would not have imagined such a result. The best ending they could think of was that Yi Shiwen stopped Mu Shengjie's pursuit, and Mu Shengjie could not kill him. But now all of this had obviously turned all their views upside down, especially those of law enforcement hall disciples. It was like seeing the God in their hearts failing. They were dumbfounded, and their worldview had collapsed. How could this happen? Mu Shengjie, who was invincible in their hearts, was actually defeated. It was a massive defeat to Yi Shiwen, who was not looked upon highly by others previously. Moreover, it was a defeat without any suspense. One small step made a great difference. How could this happen? Many older generation masters were sighing. They were considered to be the same generation as Mu Shengjie and Huang Wuji, and some even earlier than that. They personally witnessed how Mu Shengjie achieved glory step by step and became a part of true martial school's legend. But this legend was coming to an end now. For them, their hearts panicked for a moment. An era was over, signifying the end of a legend. A legend and an era that belonged to them was coming to an end. Although there was still Huang Wuji was almost on par with Mu Shengjie. Since Mu Shengjie was defeated, many people were not so confident in Huang Wuji. With this battle, Yi Shiwen was probably going to rise strong. This was a new emerging era and a new legend. This legend was achieved by defeating the old legend. It was the same as when they witnessed Huang Wuji and Mu Shengjie defeated one after another old legends to achieve their own legend. This marked the end of this era. The end of a legend. If you don't have a secret technique, you can't be my opponent at all. Mu Shengjie shouted bitterly. Yi Shiwen kept retreating due to his attacks just now, but when he was feeling proud, he didn't expect that the situation suddenly changed in a flash. The situation was suddenly reversed from Mu Shengjie pursuing Yi Shiwen to Yi Shiwen pursuing him. It was as if he had entered hell from heaven in an instant. As long as it is enough to kill you. He didn't want to continue bickering, and it didn't matter at all now. Yi Shiwen stepped out in one step and caught up with Mu Shengjie. He wanted to kill Mu Shengjie once and for all. That's enough. A command burst out of the true martial school underneath. The voice was echoing like a great bell. It was just like a sound penetrated straight into a person's heart. A giant hand tore the skyline apart and grabbed Yi Shiwen to prevent him from killing Mu Shengjie. Yi Shiwen felt an inexplicable great force press down suddenly. This was a force that made him unable to resist at all. It was a force that surpassed the great sage realm. In the face of this power, Yi Shiwen was timid like a rabbit facing a ferocious lion. There was no chance of winning at all. Due to the sudden surprise, the pair of demon's wings behind him flapped suddenly. Yi Shiwen appeared hundreds of miles away instantly, avoiding this giant hand. Chapter 709. Return of the Tibetan Star's Son. Yi Shiwen narrowly avoided being caught by this big hand. Just as he let out a sigh of relief, the Transcendent Realm Master attacked. He knew that if Mu Shengjie couldn't hold on till the end, it was likely that the Transcendent Realm Master would intervene. This was because as far as he knew, such a master ran the law enforcement hall. Not to mention he was Mu Shengjie's teacher. How could he watch Mu Shengjie die in Yi Ziwen's hands? Therefore, Yi Shiwen made up his mind to make a quick kill. Just now, he suddenly adjusted the Dragon Vein power output with the idea to eliminate Mu Shengjie in one fell swoop, leaving no chance of survival. However, he was obviously still a step slower. He was actually interrupted by the Transcendent Realm Master. He was secretly dripping with cold sweat. The Transcendent Realm Master was worthy of being the Transcendent Realm Master. Powers like that were hard to contend against. He did not seem to even be on the same level as a great sage. Fortunately, Yi Ziwen's demon wings were fast enough. In addition, he was already mentally prepared and had been guarding against the intervention of the Transcendent Realm Master, so he managed to narrowly avoid this terrifying attack. It was just one attack that gave him chills deep in his heart. The Transcendent Realm was terrifying. People usually talked about how great a great sage was and how a great sage was like a pillar. Only after battling with a Transcendent Realm Master would they understand that the gap between the two was so big that ordinary people simply could not understand it. It was just like how the ants crawling on the ground would never understand the world of the eagle in the sky. He really had the strength to kill Yi Shiwen with one blow. The Transcendent Realm Master was the true pillar of true martial school. These few people were the ones holding up the backbone of true martial school. Just like how the Tibetan Star Summit had only had one heir for several generations, but their legacy was still extremely influential. The reason was no other than because the Tibetan Star Summit was run by a powerful Transcendent Realm powerhouse. However, what Yi Shiwen didn't expect was that the other party did not stop at rescuing Mu Xingjie. He straightaway formed a big hand and suddenly reached to grab Yi Shiwen. This was in order to eliminate Yi Shiwen, and he was very determined. Yi Shiwen was suddenly terrified. He hurriedly spread the demon's wings behind him and began to fly away. With his already terrifying speed, not to mention the power of the dragon vein, allowed him to traverse hundreds of miles instantly. However, despite this, he was almost killed by that big hand. Even though it didn't touch his body, the terrifying blast of air that surged made it hard for him to catch his breath, and he almost coughed up a mouthful of blood. The terrifying blast of air could make his star beast's body almost vomit blood. It was conceivable how frightening this force was. However, the big hand didn't intend to stop. It straightaway grabbed at him again, and Yi Shiwen almost got caught. Boom! 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 The big hands clutched at nothing, and the empty spaces that were seized collapsed completely. Yi Shiwen managed to dodge away from those attacks by only a hairbreadth. However, Yi Ziwen's speed was getting slower even with the additional support from the dragon vein. Despite him being able to dodge away, those attacks worsened his injury, thus slowing down his speed. Just when he was about to get caught, another big hand tore through the sky and directly grabbed that big hand. Sure Dowling, do you think that there is no one defending Tibetan Star Summit? A cold voice came directly from the depths of the universe. Countless people stared at the scene in front of them. They didn't know who would be so bold. It should be known that Shi Daoling was the current law enforcement hall master, who was a powerful figure at true martial school. There were only a few people who could compete with him. The others didn't even dare to say his name. Over time, many new people didn't even know that the name of the law enforcement hall master was Shi Daoling. Many people just called him law enforcement hall master. Now, there was someone who dared to address him directly by name. Many quick-witted people had guessed that it was the law enforcement hall master, Shi Daoling, who had attacked. In the law enforcement hall, only he had such strength that could render Yi Shiwen unable to fight back. Before this, no one at all thought that they would encounter such a scene, or see the scene where the legend fell. To the many masters present, the Transcendent Realm Masters were too far away. He was not on the same level as them at all. On the contrary, people like Mu Xingjie, who was closer to the audience, accomplished his legend with hundreds of years of battles. How powerful was he? He was known as the best among the true martial school's disciples. Only a few people could match him. His attacks were mighty, but he ended up beaten terribly by Yi Shiwen and almost died. Even someone like him was defeated by Yi Shiwen. One could imagine how shocked they were. Even Mu Xingjie was defeated in this way. Yi Ziwen's position in the people's hearts rose to an unimaginable degree, replacing Mu Xingjie or placing even higher than Mu Xingjie. Such a character was actually beaten with no power to fight back. Was there anything else besides the Transcendent Master? Coupled with this cold shout, many quick-witted people already guessed that it was the law enforcement hall master who started it. No wonder he could immediately render Yi Shiwen unable to fight back. He was indeed extremely terrifying. However, what really shocked them was, who dared to call Shi Daoling's name directly? Tibetan Star's son? Have you returned? A voice filled with doubt came from true martial school. Everyone suddenly realized that this person was actually the Tibetan Star Sun, another legendary figure. As the first generation of the Tibetan Star Summit, although it was passed down linearly, being able to have transcendent realm powers made the Tibetan Star Sun's powers very frightening. If I haven't returned, how would I know that you would dare to do this ruthless act? A cold voice came from the universe. A profound old man could be seen stepping out from the depths of the universe. He appeared slow but was actually fast. In an instant, like lightning, he had already reached the battlefield where Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie were combating. He was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. His eyes were bright, so deep that the end couldn't be seen. However, if you looked at him on a normal day, he was simply an ordinary old man. Beside him, a young man stood proudly. An air of arrogance surrounded him, as if he was the center of the entire universe, strongly attracting everyone's attention. Yi Shiwen immediately recognized this young man. He was none other than the great senior brother, Huang Wuji. Then, the identity of the old man in front of him was self-evident. He was the first head of the Tibetan Star Summit, Tibetan Star Sun. Without hesitation, Yi Shiwen quickly healed his injuries with Phoenix regeneration technique. He stepped forward and said, "Greetings to Master and great senior brother." He had heard by Jiansong once say that it was possible that Master Tibetan Star Sun and great senior brother Huang Wuji were coming back because of him. He did not expect that the past 3 months of radio silence ended at this very critical moment. However, with the presence of the Tibetan Star Sun, he could finally let out a sigh of relief. Although it was his first time seeing the Tibetan Star Sun, this did not prevent Yi Shiwen from being grateful to him. Huang Wuji nodded to Yi Shiwen with a smile. He was always very optimistic about this young disciple. He thought that maybe this young disciple was sent by the gods to revive their Tibetan Star Summit. Otherwise, how could he instantly repair their Tibetan Star Sutra that their people had been pursuing for many years? Tibetan Star Sutra, the supreme technique of the Tibetan Star Summit, was the root of all the martial arts of the Tibetan Star Summit. Without the Tibetan Star Sutra, the Tibetan Star Summit could not be considered complete. Hence, the Tibetan Star disciples throughout the years were basically immersed in that chaotic battlefield all year round, looking for the Tibetan Star Sutra that might have been left behind by their predecessors. As a matter of fact, the battlefield was not a peaceful place, but an extremely dangerous place. Even the previous heads of the Tibetan Star Summit had fallen in there, almost breaking the legacy. Since then, the head of the Tibetan Star Summit must first accept a disciple and guide the disciple to a very high level, so that he himself could go to the battlefield without worry. Although it could be considered very rewarding, it was not the original intention, as the Tibetan Star Sutra was not found. Now, they did not need to go look for it anymore, because the Tibetan Star Sutra had been completed, and might even be more complete than the original version. Even he achieved a breakthrough in the realm that he couldn't achieve for a long time because of Yi Shiwen. He overwhelmed his old opponent, Mu Xingjie, with one move. This was all brought upon by Yi Shiwen, so he always felt that Yi Shiwen was sent by the gods to the Tibetan Star Summit. The Tibetan Star Sun looked at Yi Shiwen with a complex facial expression. This young disciple who he had not met yet was different from the other legacies that were divided into many factions. To the Tibetan Star Summit that only had one sole heir for many years, any disciple who came forward was his disciple. He only knew that he had such a disciple a few decades ago, but he never took it to heart, just like Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin. However, he didn't expect that he would be an extraordinary genius that was not inferior to Huang Wuji. No, he had even more innate talent than Huang Wuji. At the very least, Huang Wuji was not as impressive as Yi Shiwen when he was Yi Ziwen's age. Perhaps it was like Huang Wuji said, he was really sent by the gods to the Tibetan Star Summit people. However, his gaze only stayed on Yi Shiwen for a while. He said, "No need for such courtesy." The Tibetan Star Summit did not put much emphasis on courtesy. After all, there were only so few people in total. It was not realistic to strictly divide ranks. The Tibetan Star Sun's eyes looked deep into the universe, in the direction of true martial school. After a short while, a middle-aged man clad in traditional Chinese clothing stepped forward. He was different from the Tibetan star sun's calm temperament. This was an overbearing, powerful man. His gaze was as sharp as a knife. Wherever he went, everyone retreated, showing his strength. This man was none other than the law enforcement hall master, Shi Daoling. Chapter 710. A blessing in disguise. Shi Daoling had a vigor completely different from the Tibetan star sun. From all everywhere, it had a spirit of disdain and in the position of power. The Tibetan star sun could never raise this type of vigor. On average, a person's temperament was related to their life experience. Shi Daoling was the law enforcement hall master of true martial school. He bore great responsibilities. Among the many masters of the true martial school, only a few of them were on an equal level with him, let alone in terms of influence. Along with wielding the power to enforce law for a long time, only then this kind of vigor could be produced. However, despite the Tibetan star sun being powerful and was considered as excellent within the inner realm of the true martial school, the waning of the Tibetan star summit had been going on for many years. There were very few of them. Even with the disciples serving the Tibetan star summit were taken into account, it was not many at all. What's more, he had the hands-off management style and could not be bothered with the affairs. Naturally, he could not cultivate a powerful vigor, but the vigor had a somewhat placid and faintly discernible overtone. These two vigors were completely different from one another, and even the people could not differentiate both of them. Shi Daoling arrived in stride. He was full of vigor, compared to the invisible vigor of the Tibetan star sun. Both of their vigors were in great contrast. I was not expecting your return. Rumor has it that some time ago, you have the complete version of the Tibetan Star Sutra, but the rumor turned out to be true, is it? Shi Daoling seemed a little surprised after he looked at the Tibetan star sun. The Tibetan star summit was already frightening even with the incomplete version of the Tibetan Star Sutra, let alone Huang Wuji, who had studied the complete version of the Tibetan Star Sutra. Huang Wuji's capability would be immediately known after he engaged in a battle with Mu Shengjie. The Tibetan star sun nodded with a calm expression and said, "Now, it's time for me to understand the matter of you hurting my disciple. I heard that your people from the law enforcement hall are very active during my absence." Naturally, what the Tibetan star sun said was that they repeatedly caused trouble for Yi Shiwen. He had known of this matter. However, his silence was not out of being unaware, but rather he had not been able to find a suitable time to talk about this matter. Unexpectedly, Shi Daoling just nodded his head and did not even deny such a matter at all. He just looked at the Tibetan star summit without giving in and said, "It's just to knock some sense into him. It is inappropriate for him to show off his ability at such a young age. Naturally, I have my own method to educate my disciple. It is not up to you to decide on it. Now, you have injured my disciple. Your law enforcement hall will need to pay for some of the resources that will be needed to treat my disciple when the time comes." The Tibetan star sun let out a cold sneer and said coldly while being resolute and decisive on this matter without making hasty judgments on Shi Daoling. Shi Daoling did not refute but agreed to this proposition. Everyone knew about his idea. He had planned to take action before the Tibetan star sun's homecoming. However, since this goal was not achieved, there was no need to pester with this matter endlessly. It was already good for this matter to be concluded in such a peaceful manner. Everyone looked forward for the two men insulting and bickering with each other. However, it was no more than both of them using only a few words to end the matter. Mu Shengjie, who suffered a big loss in this matter, did not receive any compensation. On the contrary, it was reckoned that Yi Shiwen would receive a lot of compensation. However, come to think about it, from the beginning, the law enforcement hall did not handle this matter on a moral high ground. Afterwards, Shi Daoling's interference made the law enforcement hall even more passive on this matter. The most significant matter at this time was to calm the Tibetan star sun's fury. However, both of them belonged to the true martial school after all. It was impossible for them to engage in a violent battle against each other. Both of them were not merely great sages but masters in transcendent realm. A social upheaval would occur should a battle break out between two transcendent realm masters. Such a battle would be 100 times or 1,000 times worse than a hostile battle in the Great Sage realm. Mu Xingjie, who was on the side, was slowly recuperating. More than half of the injuries inflicted on his body was recovering. Although he still looked like a sorry figure, it was nothing serious. At this time, he just stood beside Shi Daoling with an ashen complexion. His face was showing that he was not reconciled to the ending of the matter. He was a person with a formidable strength. Since he joined the true martial school, he was always considered as an exceptional genius among the eyes of everyone. Now, such an exceptional genius suffered a big loss here. He had suffered a big loss at Yi Ziwen's hands. The loss of the halo of his body had caused the legendary imprints on his body to fade away. Everyone found out that he was no more than just an ordinary person. Now, he had become an accessory to bring out Yi Ziwen's glorious, outstanding and formidable identity. Facing Huang Wuji head-on was something that he finds unacceptable. If he was facing Yi Shiwen, it is just a normal level of shame. He would be really ashamed to the maximum when he was facing Huang Wuji. He and Huang Wuji had been rivals since a long time ago. It was unknown how long the rivalry between them had lasted. He even forgot the reason why both of them became hostile to each other. All he knew was that they had been competitors since a long time ago. It was not once or twice that a competition had occurred between both of them. In general, it was hard to distinguish who was superior as both of them were equally matched. Had it not been Huang Wuji receiving the Tibetan Star Sutra, which was fully recovered by Yi Shiwen and surpassed him with just one move, the competition between them may continue on until they become transcendent realm masters, becoming rivals for generations to come. Therefore, it was because of this reason that he was even more reluctant to face Huang Wuji now. He could accept losing to Yi Shiwen, but losing to Huang Wuji would be unacceptable for him. Although he did not lose to Huang Wuji now, his pathetic state was obvious to Huang Wuji. For him, how could humiliation be summarized? There were mixed feelings in his heart. Put your head up. You just lose in one round of battle. It was nothing at all. He heard Shi Daoling's voice instead. Those wise words surged into Mu Xingjie's mind. This made my Xingjie, who was still entangled in this matter, snapped out immediately. It seems that you are too successful all along. The long pathway to martial arts has just begun. Failure is nothing. The real failure is those who cannot get up after the defeat. If you do not have the ability to bear this, then you should just give up on martial arts and go into seclusion. Shi Daoling said mercilessly and honestly. However, every one of these words knocked some sense into Mu Xingjie, waking him up. Even Yi Shiwen, who was next to him, repeatedly looked bewilderedly at Shi Daoling. He did not expect him to say such a thing. As expected, he proved himself to be the law enforcement hall master. Like the saying, excessive strength gives easy access to fracturing. Whether it was Mu Xingjie or Huang Wuji, their debut was too smooth. Since their debut, they had been the formidable geniuses anticipated by others. Hence, regardless of how they performed on the outside, there was an exceptional sense of pride in their heart. This pride permeated into their bone marrows. However, this pride was accumulated by their countless victories. If they continued to win, they might not be aware of it. However, they were likely to collapse once they faced failure. The moral pillars that support their mentality were crushed by someone else. Of course, they would not be able to get up. On the contrary, it was a different story for Yi Shiwen. He did not have that kind of indifferent pride. All he had was not something he was born with or given to him by others. It was something that he had to obtain bit by bit through his efforts. Hence, he could accept setbacks. It was not that he had never encountered the tragic situation of being nearly killed by someone else. On the contrary, he often encountered such situations. Hence, he was even clearer than anyone else. This was because the geniuses that were annihilated in his hands tend to collapse in such a manner. Once the main pillar that supported their entire mentality was crushed, they could no longer get up from their setbacks. Even Huang Wuji, who was on the side, became deep in thought after hearing such words. Although he and Mu Xingjie were rivals for many years, the one who understood him the most was his own rival. He understood Mu Xingjie's situation very well. To a certain extent, he and Mu Xingjie were alike. The only difference was that he had not been defeated by others. Now, he could even imagine how horrible the situation would turn out to be if he were to be defeated. The situation where all of one's beliefs and pride being crushed was unfathomable. For him, these words also touched his heart. If he faced this situation, what would he do? Mu Xingjie was flushed red, completely showing the expression of shame for the first time, and said, "Sorry, master. I have let you down. I will pull myself together. It's just a minor setback, right? No big deal." Shi Daoling was pleased when he saw that Mu Xingjie understood his words quickly. Was Mu Xingjie stupid? No, he was not stupid at all. On the contrary, he was still a formidable genius who was the chosen one out of the 10,000. Otherwise, he would not be able to get to where he was now. However, it was because of this that he was unimaginably stubborn. He firmly believed that he was right. So, even though he was wrong, it was hard for him to change. Now, it was all thanks to Yi Shiwen that he was able to change his perception so quickly. His battle with Yi Shiwen had greatly upset him. For him, this battle was equivalent to eliminating the entire world. Everything was destroyed by Yi Ziwen's attack. Hence, it was much easier to rebuild his belief than before. When he thought about this, Shi Daoling was very satisfied. How much did a minor setback matter? As a martial arts expert, who would dare to proclaim that they had never encountered a setback? However, the losers were those who could no longer pull themselves together once they failed. A genuinely strong man would pick themselves up together after repeated failures. Although Mu Xingjie had lost his unbeaten winning records this time, he managed to reconstruct his determination in mastering martial arts. From this aspect, he had gained something valuable. Even if he had to compensate the Tibetan Star Summit with some supplies, it was nothing. Compared with the gain, what he had to sacrifice was nothing. Huang Wuji, don't get elated too soon. I will still challenge you. Mu Xingjie unexpectedly looked at Huang Wuji without ever forgetting his old rival, Huang Wuji. I am waiting for your challenge. Huang Wuji looked at Mu Xingjie indifferently and did not seem to take him seriously. But you are no match for me now. 5 years. I will give you 5 years. Once you polished up your skills, we will definitely have a battle. Chapter 7:11. A huge debate. Huang Wuji didn't take the current Mu Xingjie to heart and bluntly pointed out that the current Mu Xingjie was not his opponent. Mu Xingjie might only be worthy to attend a battle 5 years later. In his mind, Mu Xingjie was maybe one of the very few people to be able to contend with him. Perhaps it was lucky to have such a rival for so many years. If it was in the past, Mu Xingjie might be provoked long ago, as he would never admit that he was not as good as Huang Wuji. However, he had to admit that he was worse than Huang Wuji now, but he did not take it to heart, as this was just a temporary gap. In 5 years, he would definitely be able to improve to the point of defeating Huang Wuji. Both of them had intense fighting intentions in their eyes. It is time to end it. It is time to end this battle which has lasted for thousands of years. They did not want to continue the battle in the transcendent realm. As for Yi Shiwen, Mu Xingjie just glanced at him lightly without saying anything. He had a mixed feeling. Although Mu Xingjie had an all-around change in his state of mind because of this battle, he still didn't like Yi Shiwen. However, he couldn't say anything threatening. Mu Xingjie was just a defeated opponent. If he still said anything threatening to Yi Shiwen at this time, wouldn't he, the defeated, looked more ridiculous? But this did not mean that he had conceded defeat. As time passed, he would return sooner or later. Furthermore, Mu Xingjie also knew that Yi Shiwen might have used some secret techniques to become so powerful now. There would be a time where he would be able to fight with Yi Shiwen again sooner or later. Since this matter is over, we will go back first. Shi Daoling did not linger around further. He carried Mu Xingjie, who was rather battered but more spirited, and returned to true martial school directly. Yi Shiwen and the other two did not stay any longer. Shortly after they left, they got on the glimmer of light and landed at Tibetan Star Summit. There was stillness in the universe. Everyone still seemed to be in the battle just now. It seemed that they never thought that this battle that attracted much attention would end like that. No one expected it. Whether it was Mu Shengji's strength at the beginning, or Yi Zaiwen's soaring rise and strength later on, they all watched to their heart's content. It was like sitting on a roller coaster, going to heaven and hell every now and then. Anyway, they knew that Yi Shiwen was about to rise. It didn't matter the amount of people speculating the type of stimulating secret technique that Yi Shiwen used to achieve this level, and even defeated Mu Xingjie in the end. The fact that he defeated Mu Xingjie was an undeniable reality. A segment of historical legend ended today. It was about to turn a new page to start a new legend, an unprecedented legend. It was just a few decades since Yi Shiwen entered true martial school, and he actually did something that shocked the 4 honor seats. How could this not shock everyone to the core? The news of Yi Zaiwen's final victory in Yi Shiwen and Mu Shengji's century matchup spread like a wildfire throughout the entire true martial school overnight. It immediately sparked off a huge debate. How is this possible? Brother Mu is an invincible master in the great sage great perfection realm. What capabilities does Yi Shiwen have that he can actually defeat Brother Mu? This is impossible. Many people simply did not believe this result. In their impressions, Mu Xingjie had been exceptionally strong in the past hundreds of years. Only a handful of people like Huang Wuji could belittle and provoke him. If Mu Xingjie lost to Huang Wuji, it was more believable and everyone would accept it quickly. After all, Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji had fought for countless years. Although they had yet to have a real decisive battle against each other, they were regarded as almost on par with each other. Hence, it was possible that any one of them would win as a result of the battle. But Yi Shiwen was definitely not included among these people. It was not that Yi Shiwen was unknown. On the contrary, he was very famous. In terms of fame and recent spotlight, perhaps no one could compare with Yi Shiwen. But fame and strength was not the same thing at all. Everyone did not deny Yi Zaiwen's innate talent. They were of the opinion that Yi Shiwen could be on par with Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji sooner or later, but that was in the future. It might also be a matter of the next few hundred years, but definitely not now. So when this happened, countless people were extremely shocked and found it unbelievable. Sure enough, Yi Shiwen won. I have said before, the depth of Yi Zaiwen's strength is unfathomable. Although I don't know what martial techniques he used, he must have the confidence to win since he clearly challenges Mu Xingjie. Some people also declared that they were very optimistic about Yi Shiwen from the start, and proudly bragged everywhere to show their foresight. This Yi Shiwen used 2 secret techniques consecutively in this battle. Everyone knows the ramifications of secret techniques. Yi Zaiwen's secret techniques are so powerful, so the ramifications are likely to be too big to an unbearable extent. Perhaps Yi Shiwen is crippled now. Many people were also speculating whether Yi Shiwen was crippled because of the use of secret techniques. No matter what, a new segment of legend is about to rise today onwards. I do not know whether it is a good or bad thing for our true martial school, especially in this eventful period. Some older generation masters lamented that they watched Mu Xingjie go step by step to legendary status, but now they also watched this legend destroyed. It was difficult to explain such a mixed feeling. Nevertheless, it was undeniable that there would be a brand new legend and myth rising gradually after this battle. The result of this battle had even alarmed some old masters in close cultivation. It was not that Yi Shiwen had such influence, but Mu Xingjie had such influence because he was the next law enforcement hall master. In other words, he was one of the top levels of the true martial school by default. Any of his actions could attract the attention of the top level of the true martial school, not to mention such a huge defeat. How could it not attract the attention of countless people? It was also the same for even these old freaks who had been in close cultivation all year long. Yi Shiwen, who caused a huge turbulence outside, was in the main hall of the Tibetan Star Summit. Due to the return of Tibetan Star Sun, everyone at the Tibetan Star Summit came together. Even Lu Yanlan, who was in close cultivation, had come out. The return of Tibetan Star Sun was an important matter after all, so she had to come out. It was not that she was in a close cultivation that she couldn't get out of. Everyone came forward to greet Tibetan Star Sun one by one, and stood beside him. Tibetan Star Sun glanced at his 6 disciples, and there was a trace of pride in his gaze. The weakest among his 6 disciples, Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin, were also Sage Realm Masters and were able to assume responsibilities independently. Not to mention the first 3 disciples who all stepped into the Great Sage Realm. Especially the new 6th disciple, Yi Shiwen, who gave him a huge surprise. He didn't expect that the Tibetan Star Sutra, which had troubled Tibetan Star Summit for countless years, was solved during his leadership period. Of course, it was Yi Shiwen who solved the problem. He can actually comprehend the full version of Tibetan Star Sutra. Isn't this the blessings from the ancestors' spirits of the past? The most important thing was that his innate talent seemed to be stronger than his great disciple, Huang Wuji. In just a few decades, Yi Shiwen could actually step into the half-step great sage without any pointers. He even used the secret techniques to beat Mu Xingjie, who was well known in the school. This was beyond his expectations. After returning to Tibetan Star Summit, Yi Shiwen swapped out his actual body in replacement while the others were not paying attention to him. On the other hand, he kept Star Beast Avatar in Tianyuan Mirror to cultivate. The Blood Slave had completely merged with the Star Beast Avatar now. In other words, the Blood Slave had really become the spirit of the Star Beast. It was no longer like the past where he could only summon its physical body. Of course, it would take some time to fully receive the legacy and fully exert the powerful fighting power of the Star Beast. It would also take a lot of time to slowly explore and refine the many secret techniques and innate magical powers of the Star Beast clan. All these would need some time. If the Blood Slave had already done this previously, it would not be so hard to beat Mu Xingjie. In fact, it would probably be many times simpler. This was a Star Beast after all. The adult Star Beast directly led to true martial school's decline. Although this was just a young Star Beast, its strength was still unimaginable. Yi Shiwen could only rely on his powerful physical body to battle previously. After all, even if he had the many Star Beast clan's magical powers and secret techniques, it was impossible to use them in that battle. Outsiders thought that Yi Shiwen had to rely on some secret techniques to defeat Mu Xingjie. He also wanted to create such an impression intentionally where it really seemed like he just depended on some secret techniques instead of his real strength. Compared to being ridiculed about this, he was even more unwilling to expose everything related to Star Beast Avatar. Just like the secret of Yi Ziwen's demon wings, he couldn't let anyone realize this secret. It was all right to be regarded as his secret technique. This way, not many people would really explore the underlying reason. After all, everyone knew that the secret method was related to the true secret of a warrior. Therefore, no one would look into it unless they wanted to become his enemy. Tibetan Star Sun smiled smugly. Although there were not many people in Tibetan Star Summit now, it could be said that there were a large number of talents. If it was not because of the recent uproar caused by Emergent School's attack on True Martial School, Tibetan Star Summit's plan to revive could really be activated. Then, Tibetan Star Summit could open its gates and accept a big number of disciples. The reason he came back from the extraterrestrial battlefield had a direct relationship with this matter. This matter was related to the life and death of True Martial School. He couldn't ignore it. Chapter 7:12. An opportunity to quickly increase strength. The current situation was not suitable for the implementation of the revival plan. It would not be implemented at least until Emergent School's attack came to an end. Now that Emergent School's upcoming attack had become a consensus for everyone, True Martial School was also preparing for the upcoming invasion of Emergent School. No one knew how the Emergent School would attack and what violent storm it would bring. In such situations, the Tibetan Star Summit's revival plan could only be put aside first, so that they could go all out to deal with the upcoming Emergent School attack. Everyone had a relaxed smile on their faces as if the Emergent School's upcoming attack was already resolved. This was none other than because the Tibetan Star Sun was back. With such a terrifying transcendent realm ace at the helm, they felt confident and prepared. Even if Emergent School really invaded, they already had the best guarantee. A transcendent realm powerhouse was an undefeated ace wherever he went in this world. Everyone did a great job in my absence. Tibetan Star Sun said with a smile. Yi Shiwen, Your grievances with the law enforcement hall must be put aside first. The priority now is none other than facing the emergent school's attack. Tibetan Star Sun looked at Yi Shiwen and Yi Shiwen nodded. He knew the importance of the moment emergent school would attack. He understood what mattered and what didn't. In the eyes of others, the news that emergent school was about to invade seemed more like just a possibility. However, for Yi Shiwen, it wasn't just a possibility, but something that was about to happen. Something that would definitely happen. From the actions of Blood Wolf Plunderer, he could infer that emergent school's attack was about to happen, and would definitely happen. Yi Shiwen didn't want to invoke internal conflict at this time precisely for this reason. Therefore, he wanted to understand the grievances with law enforcement halls before that happened, hence he invited Mu Xingjie to a battle. Otherwise, why would he rashly invite Mu Xingjie to a battle when he didn't have complete assurance? It was so that when he fought emergent school, nothing would go wrong. Seeing Yi Shiwen nod, the Tibetan Star Sun did not say much. He believed that Yi Shiwen was able to clearly distinguish the situation at the critical time. The reason why I rushed back this time is largely because of the news that emergent school was about to attack. The Tibetan Star Sun's facial expression became serious. I can tell you that the emergent school's upcoming attack is not just a possible inference, but a reality, something that will become true soon. The senior executives have already received some news that confirmed that emergent school is about to attack. Thus, during this time, everyone should be extra careful. Don't go out unless you have to. Tibetan Star Sun's words suddenly made everyone nervous. Even Huang Wuji was no exception. Although he was already a great sage, great perfection master, as long as he was not a transcendent realm master, he did not have the ability to dominate the other party. In true martial school and emergent school where formidable giants meet, great sage seemed far too minuscule, unable to kick up any waves. Only a transcendent realm master could lead a battle, but only lead it. To completely control the battle was simply impossible. This was true even for Huang Wuji, not to mention others. Now the entire southern region, even the entire true martial domain was not safe. Staying in true martial school was the safest, although true martial school would definitely be the main force of the opponent's attack. However, within true martial school, they had operated the base for many years. Naturally, they were superior in some aspects, a few of them being arrays. They had many powerful arrays that might not be good for offense, but advantageous for defense. Therefore, even in true martial school's weakest, most dangerous period, this true martial mountain had never been broken by anyone before. Several people nodded their heads, agree. Yi Shiwen was only a little worried about his parents and relatives who were still in the Great Yu Empire, although he knew that emergent school probably would not destroy such an inconspicuous force like the Great Yu Empire Yuan sect. Because what emergent school wanted to defeat or even eliminate the root, that would be true martial school. Once the true martial school was overpowered, defeated or even wiped out, the remaining small forces would naturally surrender and become emergent school's right wing. So they probably wouldn't harm them. It was not that these small forces were too powerful, but that they did not have a big sect or great wealth like those huge legacies, so they were easily swayed. The secret to their survival was just following the direction of the wind. However, Yi Shiwen couldn't guarantee that emergent school did not have people who would go after the small forces out of boredom. If there was, he was afraid that he would regret it. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen decided to write them a letter when the time came to ask them to hide first and lay low for now. Whether true martial school or emergent school emerged victorious, he would say more when the results were out. Most importantly, even if the true martial school won in the end, it might attract the siege of other forces in the true martial domain. They had been coveting the South region for a long time and were eager to kill the old master, true martial school, so another turmoil might happen at the end. A war-ridden era was approaching. Yi Shiwen, this is a good opportunity. Yi Mo's voice suddenly said. Now that emergent school is about to attack, true martial school is selectively retracting forces. Hence, the extraterritorial battlefields that are wreaking havoc in Tian region should be lacking powerful master now. If you apply for a transfer, you probably won't be rejected. Yi Mo's voice interrupted Yi Zaiwen's thoughts and made him a little puzzled. If there was anyone in this world who did not want him to die, Yi Mo was definitely the vehement one. Now, staying in the true martial school was undoubtedly the safest. Why would he go to the extraterritorial battlefield? Although that place was not directly above true martial school, it should not be on the main route of the emergent school's attack. However, even if it was on the secondary route, it might be a disaster for him. Although he could have the strength of the Great Sage Realm Great Perfection after summoning Star Beast Avatar, just like Huang Wuji's concerns, in the collision between the forces that were on the level of formidable giants, his strength was not enough. If he really bumped into them, he was afraid he would be wiped out. Seemingly knowing Yi Zaiwen's doubts, Yi Mo continued, "In this world, the greatest security guarantee is not any array nor is it relying on powerful people, but your own strength being powerful enough." Yi Shiwen could understand. He nodded. As the saying went, it was better to rely on oneself than others. If you have the strength of the transcendent realm, then you have the capital for offense and defense in this turmoil, said Yi Mo. But my actual person is not even a great sage, much less transcendent realm. I might not necessarily be able to enter the transcendent realm within 1,000 years. Yi Shiwen said in his mind. Although he was very confident in the future of his martial arts, being confident did not mean blind arrogance. He knew his current condition. According to the current speed of cultivation, even if he had the violet limitless chi pellet, he would still need some time for him to achieve a breakthrough to become great sage, never mind the transcendent realm. If he was able to enter the transcendent realm within 1,000 years, he would already find it very fast. There is no way I can make it before this battle. Your actual person may not be able to keep up with the transcendent realm, but don't forget, the Star Beast Avatar has a chance right now. He is already a great sage, great perfection. Even if he is only promoted to the half-step transcendent realm, your room for maneuvering would become a lot bigger, said Yim. Even so, it's impossible. At the speed of Star Beast Avatar's cultivation, I don't know how many years it would take to enter the transcendent realm. Yi Shiwen said while shaking his head. Even if the Star Beast Avatar was able to cultivate because he was fully merged with the Blood Slave now, even if he was already a great sage, great perfection, it was still very difficult to take this step. If he did not have any special encounters, only ground away time, a few hundred, 1,000 years would pass by quickly. It was nothing. In actuality, those who could rise to transcendent realm within 1,000 years were already considered very powerful. Just like Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie, who had been hailed as rare geniuses. So there is a chance now, Yi Mo said halfway, but was interrupted by Yi Shiwen. You mean the adult star avatar that has been sealed? Yi Shiwen immediately knew what Yi Mo was thinking. He immediately drew a breath. That was a malefic elderly predecessor, who knocked true martial school at its peak state down to earth. He was an existence that countless true martial school seniors banded together couldn't kill. They could only seal him. Although he said before that he would kill this star beast with his bare hands sooner or later, he never thought about fighting the adult star beast now. Isn't that asking for death? Is it any different from asking for death? So he didn't have such thoughts at all. He only remembered it when Yi Mo reminded him. You know how dangerous that star beast is. Once released, the entire true martial domain would be destroyed. Yi Shiwen said, shaking his head quickly. But this is the only opportunity you have in front of you, the only way to make the Star Beast Avatar enter the half-step transcendent realm at once. Also, I didn't say release the monster. Yi Mo said and shook his head. Obviously, he clearly knew what the thing inside the seal meant. 1. Malefic. A Chinese belief that a certain someone is the curse of a person as though he is the person's natural nemesis that will bring disasters to the person. Chapter 713. The idea of fighting an adult star beast. Once the star beast was released, what awaits would be an overflowing calamity in the sky. The true martial domain might even be destroyed by it. But this is the only way, said Yi Mo, with your current strength and status, if you are going to take up a post at the extraterritorial battlefield, your words will have an enormous weight and you will be in a position of power. That way you will have a chance. The extraterritorial battlefield was not particularly a place of significance. Abandoning that place would have literally no effect on other aspects. However, a giant beast that could bring destruction to the world was sealed in that place. Hence, this place had become a dilemma. It was hard to decide whether it was needed to defend that place. At this time, if Yi Shiwen asked to guard that area, the people in the faction might not agree with his request. The reason was Yi Shiwen played an important role in the faction now, unlike in the past. When he first entered the true martial school, his death would not mean anything to the people of the school if he was to participate in the extraterritorial battlefield. In the true martial school, there were at least 800,000 people like him. If one of them, and even if a bunch of them, were dead, no one would even bother with it. However, he had shown enough potential that he could compete with Huang Wujie and Mu Xingjie in the future. With such a potential, he was likely to be another expert in the transcendent realm. While the true martial school could withstand the death of 1 million legends, the death of an expert in the transcendent realm was something they could not afford. Although Yi Ziwen's potential to be the expert in the transcendent realm was ambiguous, he was still a person that they could never afford to lose. Hence, once the application went up, it was difficult to obtain a permit. This was the matter that worried Yi Mo the most. In the true martial school, the great sage had a saying below the middle level. Once a person became a great sage, they could utilize their strength to become a monarch and assume authority in one place. Generally, they would need to defend their spot. Hence, Yi Shiwen was also given the opportunity to defend the extraterritorial battlefield. However, this also posed a very difficult problem. But how do you plan on doing it? Yi Shiwen asked. He did not know what Yi Mo was planning on doing. I intend to borrow the power of this star beast. They all belong to the same bloodline. I have a magic skill which I can use to extract the power of the flesh and blood of the adult star beast. This will allow the star beast avatar to break through quickly, said Yi Mo. Yi Shiwen frowned. To say that this kind of magical skill was rare was incorrect. In the demon-worshipping religion, even individuals of the depraved religion were capable of such skill. However, even if they were capable of doing so, there were typically very few people who would choose this method. There was a simple explanation behind it. This was because there was a hidden yet huge danger of this skill. In the short term, practitioners would be able to make rapid progress. However, there would be a great hidden danger in the future. Hence, the depraved religion was not able to successfully excel under the stars. Since there were hidden and great dangers that came with this martial arts technique, there were rarely experts from the depraved religion. Are there no ramifications for such martial techniques? Yi Shiwen asked. Although it was not a person, he still valued Star Beast Avatar. If there were any serious ramifications, then he might as well not want it. The Star Beast Avatar would be playing an important role in Yi Ziwen's plan in the future. Hence, it must not be crippled in such a manner. There will definitely be ramifications. Yi Mo told the cold truth. After all, this world is fair. The benefits one received was based on how much one put in their efforts. Despite this cheap trick enabling one to enter the realm swiftly, the ramifications were also very deadly. However, it is because they are all star beasts, all the defects that are left behind by the fusion failure are no longer there. Unlike the fantastic oddities of the human race, everyone practiced different martial arts. There were a scarce number of star beasts. Furthermore, a large degree of their cultivation was reliant on the innate talent and magical power of their clan. The martial techniques they cultivated were basically repetitive. So, the power they cultivated was of a common origin. Through this manner, it could be quickly integrated into it without any ramifications. This was what Yi Mo had originally planned. Yi Shiwen thought about it, gritted his teeth and said, "So, that's how we will do it." After thinking for a while, he decided to go ahead with Yi Mo's idea. Since Yi Mo said this, then he must completely be certain. Otherwise, knowing his character, he would definitely not say out loud. Besides, when the emergent school was about to make a large-scale invasion at this moment, were there any faster and better ways than this to improve its strength? Yi Mo was right. If the emergent school was going to attack with all their strength, there was a huge possibility that they were going to give it all they got. At that time, the experts of the Transcendence realm would be able to show off their tyrannical power. The great sage would have no abilities to intervene. However, it would be a different story if his improvement reached the half-step Transcendence realm. At that time, his strength would increase greatly. Between advance and retreat, there would be more options to go for. In the realm after the Great Sage, the half-step Transcendent realm was also divided into 3 stages: initial, intermediate, and late. As for the Transcendent realm, its division was unlike that of the Sage realm and the Great Sage realm but was directly divided into 9 levels. These were what Yi Mo told Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, at his current level, it was impossible to reach out to the knowledge pertaining to Transcendent realm. If there were many people in the Great Sage realm, then there were only a few people in the Transcendent realm. The Tibetan Star Sun was probably the only thing that was close to him. However, even this was his first time seeing the Tibetan Star Sun. This also included the other experts of the Transcendence realm, who were rare existences on ordinary days. The only time where ordinary individuals were able to meet such rare existences was when Xiaoye wanted to become an apprentice. It was really like a miracle at that time. Most people were not able to see even one Transcendent Realm Master in their lifetime. Now, all of them appeared in public one after another unexpectedly. However, according to Yi Mo, despite these experts being in the Transcendent Realm, their ranks were relatively low. Most were at rank 1 of the Transcendent Realm. However, even so, Yi Shiwen could no longer fight against them. "Master, I want to apply for the transfer to the defense team on the extraterritorial battlefield," said Yi Shiwen. The crowd gave Yi Shiwen a strange glare. They did not know what he was thinking. At this moment when a war was about to break out, everyone was thinking about transferring back to true martial school. Why would he want to be transferred outside instead? Did he not comprehend how dangerous it was at this moment? Why do you want to be transferred outside? The Tibetan Star Sun said to Yi Shiwen. Of course, the true martial school was among the safest places at this time, especially for their Tibetan Star Summit. They only had a few disciples in total. Each of them was precious and they could not lose any of them, especially Yi Shiwen, the disciple who might reach the Transcendence realm in the future. They even could not afford to lose such a disciple. I want to go out to lay low. Also, if the emergent school launches an attack here, I can leave as soon as possible. They will not be able to catch up with me, said Yi Shiwen. The Tibetan Star Sun was extremely skeptical towards Yi Ziwen's answer. However, he nodded without even giving it much thought and said, "Okay, I'll help you apply for it." How could he not see through Yi Ziwen's insincere words? However, he did not expose Yi Shiwen. He knew that Yi Shiwen was certainly not a person who was not able to distinguish priorities and personal matters. However, now that he said so, he must have come up with his own ideas. He did not think about this matter deeply. Everyone had their own secrets. The true martial school would never blindly ask everyone to reveal their secrets. This was because doing so was not only unrealistic but it would also trigger the anxieties of others. Since Yi Shiwen requested, there must be a reason for his compulsory trip. Of course, the most important thing was that he believed in Yi Ziwen's strength. Even if he could not stand against 1,000 troops on his own, he definitely had the strength to escape. Even though he was not in the true martial school, the news was spreading continuously. Naturally, he knew of Yi Ziwen's outstanding performance, about how Yi Shiwen had managed to escape from the clutches of the Soul Destruction Temple Master. Although he did not take the Soul Destruction Temple Master seriously, Yi Ziwen's ability to escape at a disadvantaged situation was undeniably sufficient to prove that his personal strength was indeed extraordinary. Now that his safety could be guaranteed, the other concerns were then insignificant matters. Seeing that the Tibetan Star Sun did not look into the matter in depth, Yi Shiwen could not help but feel relieved. He was a little grateful. Of course, he knew that the Tibetan Star Sun should be able to see that there were some flaws in this plan, but he did not ask anything about it. Instead, he just immediately helped him get things done. All of a sudden, Yi Shiwen had a feeling. It was the feeling of being at home, which was not bad. He had not felt this way for a long time. In the past, when Mountain Qingfeng was divided into different clans, his father, who was an elder, would protect him. However, once he arrived at the headquarters, he had no one to rely on but met with enemies instead. In each step of martial arts, he only relied on his own strength without any external support. His own strength was the only thing he could depend on. Gradually, he forgot the original feeling. There were a lot of things which did not require him to be on the front line. He knew there was a backer that he could rely on. He knew that he could only rely on himself on most things, but it was a lot better to have something to rely on rather than nothing. Several other people saw that the Tibetan star's son did not continue interrogating on the matter. Hence, they also stopped pursuing the matter because there was no need to do so at all. They also believed that Yi Shiwen always had his own reasons for doing so. He would not be reckless to let himself be killed. However, if things become out of control, you better immediately retreat, said by Jiansong. Among the fellow apprentices, he was the closest to Yi Shiwen. He was the one who adopted Yi Shiwen into the sect from the beginning. After that, he had frequently protected Yi Shiwen. The relationship between the two was far greater than that of others. Hence, it was natural of him to be more caring towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen nodded. Of course, he would not choose to fight recklessly at the cost of his life. With the Tibetan star's son taking action, this matter naturally had no suspense and was carried out quickly. Yi Shiwen, who was the rising star of the true martial school, would never be allowed to be part of an external transfer since it was a very dangerous move. However, since it was a personal proposal of the Tibetan star's son, no one wanted to go against it. Since his master has even agreed to it, what other reasons were there for others to go against it? After obtaining permission, Yi Shiwen did not hesitate and rushed to the extraterritorial battlefield. Chapter 7:14. Going straight into the sealed site, the extraterrestrial battlefield was still in chaos. The news that Emergent School was about to invade had led to a large number of true martial school disciples to return to true martial school, but there were still a lot of courageous disciples who stayed here. Most importantly, this was a heaven for Star Beast. A large number of Star Beasts lived here. Even with the departure of the true martial school disciples, it was still the same as before. This place did not restore its calmness after the true martial school disciples left. They were still fighting and killing each other on a large scale. The killing between different clans never seemed to stop at all. The great sage that used to preside here had also returned to true martial school. Only some sage realm warriors still watched over the warriors who were still staying and cultivating here. Many of them were even disciples who were of Yi Ziwen's generation. They were still staying here to cultivate, unlike Yi Shiwen, whose cultivation had already made rapid progress. In general, it was no longer the same as the peak period. In an ancient city of the extraterrestrial battlefield, some sage realm masters guarding here were waiting for Yi Ziwen's arrival. With the departure of the previous great sage, the upcoming Yi Shiwen would become their superior, who would be the master who presided over this area. Compared with Yi Shiwen, they were nothing at all. Although the invasion of Emergent School was imminent, it was still too far away for them. But Yi Shiwen, who was about to take up the new post, was close at hand. Furthermore, the person was not an ordinary great sage, but a superstar like Yi Shiwen. He was a freak who was not a great sage, but could kill a great sage. When he was an ordinary disciple decades ago, he was already able to slash his way to fame in the extraterrestrial battlefield when he killed the first elite-level opponent in his life. Yi Shiwen was already world-renowned from then onwards. The only thing was that he was world-renowned under a disciple identity. But he came as a ruler now. With his status in true martial school and his own strength, he could easily establish his own kingdom. Therefore, many people considered a great sage as a ruler of a kingdom. Although Yi Shiwen was not a great sage, he was no different from other great sages. No one knew why the school's top levels sent such a great killer here. However, they also felt somewhat relieved in the midst of the nervousness. Yi Ziwen's strength fully surfaced after defeating Mu Xingjie. He became a famous young master in the true martial school all of a sudden. Very few disciples could be comparable with him. Perhaps only the top 10 legatee honor seats and mystical people who were not seen but heard during normal days could beat Yi Shiwen. At the moment when Emergent School was about to invade, they would be much safer with such a legendary level master presiding. If Emergent School attacked this place, they would certainly not fight to death here, but they also needed strength in order to escape. If Yi Shiwen presided this place, they felt more at ease than other great sages presiding. There were rumors that Yi Shiwen could only defeat Mu Xingjie by using secret techniques. It was impossible for Yi Shiwen himself to fight against Mu Xingjie. Since the secret techniques were used, Yi Shiwen was probably crippled now. At that time, what did this have to do with them since the top levels had already sent Yi Shiwen? This showed that the so-called secret technique theory and cripple theory were all short-lived. They were simply not reliable. Coming to the extraterrestrial battlefield again, Yi Shiwen was also somewhat in nostalgia. It had been only decades since he left, but the place was completely different now. He also saw acquaintances among these guarding Sage Realm Masters. It was the elite of Law Enforcement Hall, Miao Yu, who had dealt with him before. Miao Yu, who had already reached Legend Peak at the beginning, had stepped into Sage Realm and became a master now. Seeing Yi Shiwen coming over, Miao Yu's face was still a little embarrassed. At first, he and Yi Shiwen were considered to be on the same level, but now the gap between him and Yi Shiwen was a world's difference. They were no longer on the same level. At the same time, he was a little nervous. His attitude towards Yi Shiwen was worse than unfriendly previously. He was simply hostile. If he had a chance at that time, he might have killed Yi Shiwen. If Yi Shiwen really wanted to target him now, perhaps even Law Enforcement Hall couldn't protect him. He had also heard of the battle between Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie. Compared with Mu Xingjie, Miao Yu was basically at a far cry from Mu Xingjie. If Yi Shiwen could defeat Mu Xingjie, killing Miao Yu was not a problem at all. Even the Law Enforcement Hall couldn't say anything because Law Enforcement Hall still owed Yi Shiwen a big favor. The Law Enforcement Hall master, Shi Dao Ling, attacked but didn't manage to kill Yi Shiwen. Instead, he owed Yi Shiwen a big favor. A lot of things had to be lost at that time. At this time, Miao Yu was prepared to die. He never expected that Yi Shiwen could advance so fast. Yi Shiwen could actually compete with the legendary brother Mu after just a few years. It was simply unimaginable. But fortunately, Yi Shiwen just glanced at everyone and did not keep his eyes on Miao Yu for a long time. Miao Yu had a feeling of escaping from a disaster and was relieved. But Miao Yu also knew that it was probably because Yi Shiwen did not take him to heart anymore. They were no longer characters at the same level. In fact, Yi Shiwen really did not have the heart of avenging Miao Yu. Furthermore, if he did not see Miao Yu again, he had long forgotten that there was such a person. For him, the only purpose of coming to preside over the extraterrestrial battlefield this time was to find the adult star beast, and other past grudges were not important. You all can dismiss now. Don't purposely wait for me. Let someone take me to the beast's sealed site. After a while, I will personally preside there. Yi Shiwen said indifferently and did not further share his thoughts with these people. If he wanted to build his own force here, this was a good opportunity to draw people's hearts. But he was not interested in this at all, and it was meaningless to talk about it at this time. Under the strong blow of Emergent School, all forces were short-lived and seemed very ridiculous. Everyone had no doubts. In fact, the only valuable place in the extraterrestrial battlefield was where the Star Beast was sealed. This was the most crucial place while the other places were insignificant and could be abandoned. Since the school had sent people like Yi Shiwen at this most critical time, it must be for this Star Beast. There could be no other reason that was worth sending Yi Shiwen to take risks. Since Yi Shiwen was not talkative and directly said that he came for the beast and would not change their current structure, they naturally enjoyed it. Although it was quite a pity that they failed to mingle with Yi Shiwen, it was much better than Yi Shiwen arbitrarily commanding as soon as he came. If Yi Shiwen really did that, they couldn't resist as well. After all, they were really too insignificant compared to a person with great sage-level combat power. They soon sent a person to take Yi Shiwen to Star Beast's sealed site. Although Yi Shiwen had powerful strength, he did not know where the Star Beast's sealed site was. Yi Ziwen's strength was still weak at that time, so it was impossible to know the key opening. The place where he encountered the Star Beast spirit previously was just a loophole in the sealed site. After that, true martial school had sealed the place. The person who led the way was none other than Miao Yu. Seeing Yi Shiwen had no intentions to get to the bottom of the past, Miao Yu volunteered to take Yi Shiwen there. Although there had been some grievances, any grievances could be put aside first in the bigger picture after the battle between Yi Shiwen and Mu Shengjie ended and the upcoming invasion of Emergent School. Under Miao Yu's guidance, Yi Shiwen descended all the way to the bottom of the extraterrestrial battlefield's ground. It was originally a spacious paradise where the star beasts lived. Because of true martial school's interventions now, barriers were laid down and a huge tunnel was built all the way to the sealed site. Roar! The closer they were to the huge seal, the louder the roar that came from a distance. This was a loud roar, which penetrated through the heart directly and caused an inexplicable terrible trembling from the bottom of the feet. It was a trembling feeling when mortals faced a peerless beast. The trembling was uncontrollable. Miao Yu, who was beside Yi Shiwen, started trembling involuntarily. He was not really afraid because no matter how fierce the beast was, it was just a sealed beast after all. However, it was an instinct that went straight to the heart. Yi Shiwen was the only one who did not show such a condition. Although he had not reached great sage yet, his spirit had transformed completely. Nevertheless, Yi Shiwen could also feel the huge pressure that struck his spirit. Yi Shiwen suddenly knew that this was the star beast that was sealed here, and it was really terrifying. Not to mention a sage realm master would shiver in fear. Even legends who got too close to it might be shocked to the extent of becoming a fool. This scary beast, which stood at the top of the food chain, was the culprit who caused the once flourishing true martial school to fall. But Miao Yu did not know this beast's background exactly. After all, this star beast was also a secret in the top level. It was probably difficult for Yi Shiwen to guess if he did not have Yi Mo, an old monster, by his side. If it was divulged, then true martial school would be in big trouble. This place might not even withstand the demon-worshipping religion's raid, releasing this beast that could destroy the world. These warriors stationed here only knew that there was such a monster. Chapter 7:15. Sudden change after 3 years. As for what kind of monster it was, they didn't know. However, they did know that this monster was very important for true martial school. Miao Yu didn't follow Yi Shiwen down. If he continued further, with his skills, he would probably end up kneeling on the ground. This was not the same as the coercion between the warriors. This was yielding to instincts, the fear a creature at the bottom of the food chain felt about the creature at the top. The entire human race was naturally not considered a creature at the bottom of the food chain. They were definitely one of the most powerful species in the world, but individually, they were indeed not considered very high up. Yi Shiwen was the only one left to go inside. Along the way, there were star beasts circling about, eyeing him covetously. However, with the passages that true martial school opened with one array after another, they dared not come close, otherwise they would be shaken to death. These arrays were personally developed by true martial school's supreme schoolmaster, who was a transcendent realm powerhouse. Once these star beasts came close, they would be shocked to death. Thus, although they were eyeing Yi Shiwen covetously, none of them dared to get close. However, the deeper he went inside, the more powerful the coercion he felt. Soon, even Yi Shiwen could feel a strong pressure on his body. It was a terrifying pressure, all of which was pressing on Yi Ziwen's body. The more forward he went, the stronger it got. And this was because he had protection of the barrier developed by the Supreme Schoolmaster himself. Otherwise, even he could not get close. After all, he was not even a great sage. No matter how strong he was not a great sage by nature. Even if he was a great sage in front of this star beast, he was too minuscule, not worth mentioning at all. Yi Shiwen now deeply understood that once he reached the second half of the path, it was a struggle to simply walk. Toward the end, Yi Shiwen even had to summon the Star Beast avatar in order to continue walking. It was not that the Star Beast avatar was much stronger than his actual self, but because they were homologous. The invisible coercions suddenly became smaller all at once. There was no longer an overwhelming deterrence from a different species, just the deterrence from the strong to the weak. Yi Zaiwen's actual self could only sit down at the limit of what he could take and run observing person scripture to resist. This was also a kind of cultivation. Although it was difficult, it was not necessarily a benefit for Yi Shiwen. Yi Zaiwen's star beast avatar walked all the way in until he reached the deepest point, but he saw a huge barrier standing in front of him like a mountain, exuding an inexplicable majesty. This was a barrier many seniors of True Martial School worked together to seal, representing True Martial School's strength and level at its peak. On the other side of the barrier, a huge monster lay on its back. There were chains filled with the essence of law penetrated deeply into its flesh, constantly drawing power from it. This power was also used to provide for the barrier outside, which was one of the fundamental energy sources that maintained the barrier for countless years. Without the support of the energy from this monster, the barrier would have been rendered useless. No barrier could work without relying on energy for years. Doing this could not only weaken the power of this star beast, but also increase the power of the barrier, thus killing two birds with one stone. The seniors of True Martial School who sealed it at that time were really quite impressive. Human. From the end of the barrier came a booming, hoarse voice. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt a sharp gaze piercing through the barrier. Hee, this is quite interesting. You're just a half-step great sage, yet you managed to get here. It's not easy. You are not easy at all. It's more interesting than that transcendent realm human from some time ago. Yi Shiwen suddenly understood that the voice on the other side of the barrier was the adult star beast. I didn't expect that after so many years, you still have the strength to speak. Gigi, sure enough, a star beast is impressive. Yi Shiwen clicked his tongue in wonder. Although he wasn't a master of arrays, he had cultivated to this point, so he did have basic insight. This barrier was really terrifying. If it was him on the inside, he was afraid that he would have turned into a puddle of pus and blood in no time. You actually know me? The star beast was a little confused. It didn't expect this guy who was just a half-step great sage to know its origin. This was not simple. Of course, I am who I am today thanks to you. Yi Shiwen chuckled. He released the restrictions on the demon seed in his body, and suddenly the formidable aura from the demon seed spread out in all directions. Although the demon seed was planted in his actual self, it was still possible to release some aura. You are... The star beast could no longer remain calm. It finally came to his senses. This demon seed was too familiar. This was the demon seed that it planted by splitting off a bit of its own spirit. Ah, the gods really helped me. I didn't expect that my demon slave would actually appear at this time. The gods really want me to get out of this predicament. True martial domain, true martial domain, true martial domain, I will swallow this damn world. With that, a fierce light flickered in the star beast's eyes. Two rays of red light shot out like two huge red lanterns. It was so happy. The demon seed was planted, which meant that Yi Shiwen was its demon slave, so it didn't have to continue pretending. This was the gods giving it a chance to get out of this predicament. When it first split off its spirit, wasn't it because it had this in mind? Its intention was to develop a slave in True Martial School to rescue it in the future. Unexpectedly, after so many years of losing contact with its spirit, it suddenly appeared. It was really the gods helping it. I can finally leave. The first thing it would do after leaving was to swallow this damn true martial domain. Thinking about feasting on the universe, it pondered upon him when was the last time he did it. Never mind eating the world. It even got sealed in this world for many years, and now it could finally leave. Even for a star beast, a species with a long life expectancy, this period of time was also considered extremely long. Now I can finally leave. You're overthinking. Yi Shiwen sneered. When did I say I would let you out? Yi Shiwen instantly suppressed the aura from the demon seed. At this time, the star beast finally reacted. This wasn't right. He could suppress the aura from the demon seed, which meant that something was wrong from the beginning. Something must have happened to the spirit. Otherwise, It wouldn't be like this. I am here today all thanks to you. Yi Shiwen said coldly. This was not a lie. Without the spirit of this adult star beast, he would not have been able to control the underage star beast and overcome the many dangers that followed. Don't think that anyone came to rescue you. That is simply impossible. Yi Shiwen said with a sneer. When he thought of the demon seed, the fury in his heart grew. With that, he didn't have the desire to continue speaking. He sat directly in front of the barrier and kneaded various scriptures, forming a huge array around his body. The array actually merged into the entire barrier little by little. Suddenly, uncountable power was drawn from the barrier and channeled into his star beast avatar. Although he only drew a little bit of power, the power of this adult star beast was so huge, the energy drawn into the barrier was also very large. Even if it was just a little, to him, it was like an insurmountable master was channeling a large amount of power into his whole body. These arrays were the ones Yi Mo taught Yi Shiwen. They were used to perform a demonic skill to absorb all the energy, essence, and blood into the star beast avatar. At that moment, the star beast finally realized that something was amiss. The pathetic human in front of it actually used the power from the barrier to absorb the power from its body to help himself break through. The star beast was shocked and angry at once. It didn't expect the situation to turn out this way. Instead of being able to get out of this predicament, it continued to become someone else's source of nourishment. For a proud and arrogant star beast, it was hard to accept. Roar! At the other end of the barrier, the adult star beast was ablaze with fury. It roared continuously, spewing all kinds of divine light from its body, but all of it was absorbed by the barrier, and a part of it was absorbed by Yi Shiwen's star beast avatar. It did not affect Yi Shiwen in any way. Yi Shiwen paid no attention to it. He did not care about this star beast's anger right now. Because of this star beast, he ended up getting this troublesome demon seed that he couldn't get rid of. It was just like a time bomb, it could explode at any time. Now, he was just collecting a little bit of interest. He could feel the demon seed in his body growing every moment, so he could only grow stronger faster than the growth of the demon seed. Otherwise, it would become impossible to suppress this increasingly powerful demon seed. He had no other choice. Directly ignoring the roar of the adult star beast, Yi Shiwen kept kneading the scriptures, exercising the demonic skills to absorb the power of the adult star beast. Sure enough, although there was some repulsion as Yi Mo mentioned, fortunately the power was of the same kind, so it was quickly absorbed and transformed into the star beast avatar's power. With the continuous absorption of this power, the star beast avatar's skills also skyrocketed by leaps and bounds. Yes, not bit by bit, but in leaps and bounds. Initially, with Yi Shiwen's accumulation, entering half-step transcendent realm lacked more than a little, but this power accumulation was the most critical part for Yi Shiwen's star beast avatar to enter the half-step transcendent realm. Now was the critical time where the star beast was about to enter the half-step transcendent realm, and his actual self was about to enter the great sage. Even if he didn't leave, no one would dare to come in and disturb him at this time. Time passed like fine sand through the fingers, one day after another. In a blink of an eye, 3 years passed. Boom! A series of tremendous shocks shook the entire extraterritorial battlefield. Chapter 716. The Comprehensive Invasion of the Emergent School. A series of terrible fluctuations in spiritual energy woke Yi Shiwen up straight from close cultivation. Both he and the Star Beast avatar were awakened at the same time. However, there was no movement from his Star Beast avatar. Instead, it closed its eyes and continued to absorb the energy of the barrier. His actual body stood up and walked out to see what happened. He had managed to restrain the fire in his heart altogether. He was almost close to breaking through to the Great Sage realm. Just when he was planning to swallow the violet limitless chi pellet, a violent vibration suddenly happened outside. Can it be that the Emergent School is here? Yi Shiwen's expression suddenly changed at the thought of this possibility. If that was the case, then it would be terrible. The reality was that once the Emergent School started to act, it would be an all-around attack. The all-around attack initiated by the emergent school was nothing important, but the main issue was that he was not ready. He had not broken through to the Great Sage, while his Star Beast avatar had not stepped into the half-step transcendent realm. Both of them were nearly there. All they needed was some more time for both of them to achieve a breakthrough. At that time, even if the emergent school launched their full assault, he would have some ability to protect himself. At least, he would be able to escape from the clutches of the masters of the transcendent realm. When the time came, he would have the option of either launching an assault directly or to retreat to defend the school. However, now that he had yet to achieve a breakthrough, he was still in trouble. Yi Shiwen had just arrived on the ground and instantly felt the violent fluctuations in the air. Battle cries of the true martial school masters who were stationed here for defending the area were heard from a distance. Everyone, let's leave quickly and immediately retreat back to true martial school. An all-around assault was launched to us by the emergent school. What? The emergent school? A comprehensive assault? Oh God, it actually happened. What should we do? What should we do? We are done for. The emergent school is too terrifying. It's okay. Where we are now isn't facing directly at the school. So, even if the masters of the emergent school come over, they will not focus all of their assaults in this direction. We can all escape. At this time, the current situation could be described as to be in a turmoil and frenetic activity. They no longer had the confidence to defeat the army of the emergent school. At this time, what they had in mind was how would they be able to escape from the clutches of these masters of the emergent school. Yi Shiwen, the emergent school has launched their assault. Yimo's voice reached Yi Zaiwen's mind. Yi Shiwen looked at the sky. The entire sky was covered by the clouds. The clouds were full of shadows. Unknown number of masters were lurking in the shadows. Numerous Sage Realm masters were deployed, a blatant proof that the emergent school had deployed their massive army. Otherwise, it was impossible for so many legions to appear. These were not the general disciple of the emergent school. Instead, it was a legion called the Tao Soldiers. The true martial school also had this kind of legion. The same for the Great Yu Empire at that time. The so-called Tao Soldiers were a group of soldiers who were proficient in martial arts and were raised by tyrannical and influential masters. These were no ordinary soldiers. They all possessed superb martial arts skills. Even the most elite corps were composed of the Sage Realm masters. It was conceivable that the damage inflicted by such a group of armies would be immense. They were not ordinary disciples. From the time they were handpicked, they had been fed with various medicinal materials and were taught secret martial arts techniques. They were also being drilled in arrays. All of these trained disciples were trained to become martial art warrior armies, which were meant to be better than the ordinary armies. However, they existed as a group. Tao soldiers who were left alone would never be able to fight against any ordinary disciple of equal power realm. However, in the same way, their potential was completely used up. Their room for improvement for the future was also very small. They would end up exhausting all of their resources in one go when they lose. This could not be compared to genuine disciples. However, every enormous power had raised such Tao soldiers. When it came to conquering a certain big force, it was necessary to rely on such Tao soldiers. The effect was more subtle in a group battle if disciples were deployed instead. In short, the Tao soldiers, which were weapons of mass destruction, were never deployed in a normal melee. Conversely, if the Tao soldiers were really dispatched, then it would become a battle to the end. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes and saw that above the infinite sky, many true martial school disciples were fleeing. Behind them were a group of emergent school disciples. There were a lot of Tao soldiers who were pursuing the true martial school disciples all over the place. Among them, a great deal of Great Sage's aura was faintly hidden in it. In the beginning, there were a few Great Sages on the outer battlefield and were not passive. However, the Great Sages were now being transferred back. Yi Shiwen was the only one left behind. All of this happened when Yi Shiwen was in close cultivation. The true martial school simply did not have the capability of retaliate in the face of their launched assault. However, what Yi Shiwen was confused about was where the assault was being mainly launched at. Hence, Even if there were not any great sages of a higher order within the great sage, there were only the great sages of a lower level. Not even the masters of the transcendent realm were in the group. A wave of tyrannical aura flew out from the extraterritorial battlefield. It was from the many sage realm masters who were keeping watch in the true martial school. All of them were startled at once and were fighting against the emergent school's disciple in a group. However, it was a mystery how they were a match to the emergent school's disciple. This was not due to their suboptimal strength, but that there was a huge gap between the number of people in that group and to the number of people in the emergent school group. Nevertheless, at this time, there was no other way. They must first find some ways to beat the emergent school army to retreat. Then, they would have time to escape the place one after another safely. Otherwise, they would be chased around by the opponents to be murdered. When that time came, they would utterly be defeated. Moreover, the most important thing was that this was beyond their imagination. At first, they thought that they were able to make their escape before the arrival of the emergent school, but they did not expect that the emergent school would launch an assault abruptly, which directly tore the space apart. The army suddenly appeared on the extraterritorial battlefield through the teleportation array, which gave true martial school little to no time to make their escape. Anyway, the assistance of these sage realm masters allowed some true martial school legend disciples who were a few times more in number to make their escape and take a breath for a moment. It's over. It's over. We are done for this time. We didn't expect that the masters of the emergent school would immediately appear. We did not even have the chance to escape. I didn't expect that the emergent school had arrived. Their assault came in like thunder. At first, I thought about how to escape only after the emergent school had launched their assault. I now regretted it. Come to think of it, it is really stupid of me. If I am part of the emergent school, there is no way I will give myself time to react too. A sound of anguished wailing was heard among the many true martial school disciples. On normal days, these people were not being highly valued in the true martial school. If they were valued, who would come out to practice their martial arts through toughening up at this time? They had no other choice. Compared with the privileged disciples who were valued by the faction, their martial arts skills had fallen behind severely. They had to make up for it in various ways. However, they did not expect that they would be buried here. Yi Shiwen let out a cold sneer. In his eyes, countless numbers of the Sage Realm's elders of the true martial school were beheaded continuously. They descended from the sky like dumplings. Finally, he could not help himself but to attack. A grand momentum was released once he launched his attack. His cold sneer was like a large bell and a thunder, making a rumble on everyone's heart. Although he had not broken through the great sage yet, his strength was unquestionable despite being only a half-step great sage. Moreover, during the 3 years of close cultivation, he was really almost there. Just a bit more, and he could break through the great sage realm anytime. His strength had increased not by just a bit, but by a greater amount compared to last time. Miao Yu was struggling to beat back a young captain of the Tao soldier, who was of the level of the sage realm in the emergent school. This was a rather tight situation for him. Although these Tao soldiers were not mindless puppets, they all had their own state of mind. However, they were basically deranged as they sacrificed their corporeal body and tampered with them as though they were weaponry. Within the whole force, they were the most determined group in their will to engage in battle. They were completely dauntless. On the contrary, the general disciples were still hesitating to fight. However, at this time, they had no choice but to fight. On the one hand, their opponent overpowered them. On the other hand, the number of opponents was also 10 times or even 100 times that of the true martial school. Furthermore, there were a lot of Tao soldier armies who had not made a single move from far away. There were as many as 2,000 people. Most of them were also from the legend realm. It was unknown how many sage realms and masters of the great sage realm were mixed among them. Despite not being the main force, such a large army was enough to sweep away the entire southern region. From here, it could be seen how powerful the entire emergent school was. Miao Yu was somewhat despaired in his heart. Several powerful Tao soldiers who were of the sage realm level appeared beside him. Each and every one of them emerged victorious from the piles of corpses and waves of blood. None of them were inferior to him. Sha! 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 These overbearing Tao soldiers charged straight towards him to kill him. Bang! Miao Yu was hit directly, flew away and vomited a mouthful of blood. He was seriously injured in an instant and there was no other way for him to hold on to. It's over. I am about to die. Miao Yu wailed anguishedly in his heart. Every one of these Tao soldiers' masters was not afraid of death. Most importantly, there were too many of them. There was no end to them no matter how many of them he killed. You won't win. When our school gets our own hands free, we will wipe all of you out. Miao Yu let out a sorrowful shriek. Thinking of destroying us? You are way too naive. Today not only will we annihilate all of you guys, we will then launch another assault to the headquarters of your true martial domain after this. In the end, the true martial school will only vanish in a puff of smoke. A contemptuous voice, which was full of disdain for true martial school, emitted from among the numerous number of masters in the sky. Boom! A large rumbling sound was heard and a fiery red big hand grabbed it. The previously rampant Tao soldiers were immediately caught and killed. In the face of this big hand, the ordinary Tao soldiers of the Sage Realm were just like ordinary ants and were crushed to death. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.